Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf 2.0, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku's counselor lived with Aizawa? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Nizu's beady eyes seemed to hold a strange twinkle in them as he stood from the conference table in U.Hi's faculty staff room. The staff force of over 50 men and women stood slowly in turn after seeing the principal do so. You followed suit, clutching the packet full of paperwork that you had been given only moments ago. Your eyes barely took in your own name on the front of the packet before the principal continued speaking. Tearing your eyes from the packet of information, your gaze attentively flicked back to U.A's principal. The safety of our students is of utmost priority, as are the wishes of their parents pertaining to their care under our faculty's close watch. Nizu's perpetually smiling mammalian face looked to be more on the creepy side than cute in that moment. You forced your expression to remain neutral as his eyes made brief contact with yours before he leveled every other present faculty member with the same indecipherable look. As such, each class enrolled in every level, program and stream housed on campus will be assigned both a male and female member of faculty as their dormitory advisors. A familiar snort of amusement carried from somewhere to your right, though you didn't have to turn your head at all to know that it was present Mike. Homeroom teachers are definitely stuck here at the dorms. Escicate Eraser? Eraserhead grunted, though you almost didn't hear him. You blinked rapidly and shook your head, the motion barely noticeable, as you focused once again on what Principal Nizu was saying to all the staff. Mr. Yamada is correct in his assumption, as expected. Nizu nodded pleasantly. Each homeroom teacher will reside with their classes in the assigned dormitories, along with an additional staff member of opposite gender. I trust that all faculty members will conduct themselves appropriately and will take on the caretaker role with a full sense of parental responsibility. These students will no longer just be minds to bestow knowledge upon. They will be yours to nurture and to DSP. They will be yours to comfort and guide. The faculty members around you broke out into murmurs, though you focused on Nizu with the diligence and drive that had always gotten you through major phases of change in your life. Parental responsibility sounded like a heavy gig, but it was one you were fully willing to take on to ensure the safety and well-being of the kids at U.Hi. Class and faculty member assignments are located on the front of your packet. I expect you to arrange a meeting with your fellow dormitory advisor and get yourselves acquainted. After all, Nizu laughed suddenly, you will be spending a lot of time in each other's presence. Go on now, and thank you for your time. You bowed as the principal moved out of the room, along with everyone else. As you straightened, you eyed the packet in your hands again and brought it up to your line of sight. You blinked at the bold letters on the front, spelling out your name next to your ID picture. Right underneath it, you found the droopy, bloodshot eyes of none other than Class 1 as homeroom teacher, Mr. Aizawa, Eraserhead, staring up at you rather soullessly. You squinted at the picture of your fellow faculty member, not having had much interaction with the man outside of disciplinary meetings for a few of his students. You suddenly winced as you remembered that the super angry kid was in his class, Katsuki Bakugu. He was a literal firecracker, and you were a little ashamed to admit that his constant rage was a little intimidating to you. Before you could slump in defeat, you heard him clear his throat in an attempt to garner your attention with the least amount of effort possible. Aizawa sounded like he needed a nap. Or 3. Then again, he always sounded like he was going to spontaneously fall into REM sleep anytime you were graced with his bored, apathetic presence. Now, it might sound like you disliked Aizawa, but that wasn't the case at all. You couldn't dislike someone you barely knew. This new living arrangement was going to be interesting, especially since you were a bit of a recluse yourself, a self-proclaimed homebody. Turning, you flashed your fellow dorm advisor an amiable smile. Some arrangement, huh? You'd think they'd clear it with us first. He hummed in agreement as he shut his eyes, arms folded in front of him. It's a time of panic. The world's trust in heroes is at an all-time low and the villains are getting bolder and bolder with their attempts to mess with the status quo. As U.A faculty, we've got an unerring duty to the futures of these fletching heroes. You nodded, taking in the sight of Shoyuta Aizawa up close. Hair hung loose, dark and messy around his shoulders, his capturing weapon deceptively sitting in a loose winding drape over his neck and shoulders. He wore his usual ensemble of black, baggy and practical along with his ever-present combat boots. You were positive that he wasn't going to be a distraction to you, he wasn't really your type. Of course, in that moment you didn't realize that you were going to eat those very words in due time. Fair point. You paused awkwardly, fidgeting with your packet, lacking anything of substance to say. You weren't big on small talk right off the bat unless you were comfortable with the person you were talking to. You could talk literal sheet for days if you were situated with the right crowd, but something told you that Aizawa wasn't one to indulge in meaningless conversation. You shrugged and gestured at the packet where a simple map of the dorm building layout was illustrated. You laid a finger on the highlighted building labeled 1A. I'm going to check out the dorm. I want to get a grasp of the dorm's layout before the kids arrive. Aizawa huffed and nodded, opening his eyes to reveal his dead-tired gaze once more. Sounds reasonable. You didn't know if that meant he wanted to come with you. You decided to just leave the conversation to hang awkwardly, turning towards the staff room's exit. When Aizawa followed behind you, albeit a few paces away, you stood a little straighter and begged your internal GPS system not to F things up like usual. See, your sense of direction was horrible, even with an easy-to-read map. You could have easily hung back and let your fellow dorm advisor lead the way if he pleased, but you were a bit of a stubborn mule. You huffed through your nose and squared your shoulders, squinting in concentration as you followed the map as carefully as you could. Thankfully you ended up at the right building, though your forehead was damp with sweat from the nervous exertion. Home, sweet home. You couldn't help but gesture at the new, modern-looking living quarters with excitement in your movements. The place was 10 times better than your shabby downtown apartment, that was for sure. Pretty neat, huh? The question slipped out as an out-loud musing more than anything else, and you didn't expect the stoic, apathetic man to actually answer as he stepped up beside you. It'll make keeping those reckless brats safe a little easier. Though his words sounded harsh, you couldn't help but notice the fond undertones that came with his reference to his class. He turned to you, his eyebrows rising slowly as he ped his head toward the entrance. I heard our rooms are bigger than the kids. You nodded and followed after him, feeling strangely at ease despite barely knowing the guy. He was chill, straightforward and surprisingly easy to talk to, though it did help that he kept his answers relatively short and straight to the point. Sure, he looked a little like a zombified late-night television addict because of his sunken eyes, but you figured that might have been from the use of his quirk during his nighttime rounds around the city as a pro-hero. After you both quietly assessed the inside of your new home, the two of you quickly picked your rooms without much fanfare. It turned out that the advisors shared a common living space away from the students, as well as a spacious balcony. Your rooms were on opposite sides of the living space, giving the both of you plenty of privacy, and each of your rooms had its own shower, toilet, and basin. The laundry room was a communal one with 3 machines, to be shared between the students and the faculty members residing in the dorm. You didn't mind this so much, but Aizawa groaned a little and shot you a slightly exasperated look. Just be careful about leaving your things in the laundry, I've got some perverts in my class. You frowned as you tried to recall the students in Class 1A. You were familiar with a lot of them from recently since they'd been the class that was subject to the move villain encounters. It was compulsory for them all to see you for debriefing. Some were more interesting than others. Unable to recall any specific details about the kids you were about to be sharing a living space with, you resolved within yourself to read up on their general personalities and observed dispositions, as well as at least learn their names at the bare minimum. Right? You nodded, a smile tugging up at your lips. I mean, they're teenagers. Of course they're going to be curious. Aizawa leveled you with a deadpan stare, and you weren't sure if it was different to any other look he had given you during your time within him perusing the dorms. Still, you decided to laugh in good humor. All right, fine. Duly noted, Eraserhead. You caught the smirk that tugged up at one corner of his lips, and for half a second, your brain malfunctioned. Oh, he's kinda cute. Before you could process what you saw, the expression on his face was back to its usual deadpan. You blinked and shook your head, coming to the conclusion that you were just overloaded by all the excitement of the day. right? You nodded resolutely. Looks like we're all sorted with our room assignments. I'm heading back home to read this. You raised your information packet and shook it slightly. Aizawa nodded, raising his own packet up. Same. I've got a removalist booked for 8 in the morning tomorrow. You couldn't help yourself as your jaw dropped. How did you arrange that so quick? We literally just found out about this today. His expression didn't change as he nodded at you. Yeah. Yamada texted me earlier. He sorted it. If you don't have a lot of stuff, we could probably move all our things using the same truck. It's the logical way to go. Your brows furrowed together in thought before you nodded, not seeing any issue with saving some money on a removalist truck for yourself. You didn't have much to bring anyway, just your bed, your desk, your computer, and your books. Everything else seemed to already be in place. Right. Sounds good. Suddenly, Aizawa moved his hand forward, phone in his grasp. He nodded to you, and you hesitantly took it off him, caught off guard. Huh. Your number. Your jaw dropped again. Alright. Communication and that stuff, you surmised out loud, though internally you couldn't help but get giddy. No man had ever asked you for your number. You knew this was different, completely practical, if Aizawa's bored expression was anything to go by. You typed in your number and called yourself so that his number was in your phone to be saved later. He reached back for his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. Without another word, he turned to leave, though he stopped again just before exiting the dorm's main doors. What was your name again? You straightened, though you weren't sure why. He was a colleague after all. You were equals as dorm advisors. Y/NL/N. I'm, the guidance counselor. We've met before. I did the debriefs for your students after. He turned to you, his tired eyes flickering with faint recognition. He nodded at you, cutting you off, though it was seemingly unintentional. Show Yuta Aizawa. Erase your head when I'm out on the field. Call me what you want, Aizawa's fine though. And with that, he turned his back to you and left. You blinked after his retreating back, not really sure what to make of him. He wasn't rude by your standards, just a little abrupt. It wasn't like the two of you were friends, but your interactions had been amicable enough. You resolved to stay in your space while remaining in the dorms, to keep out of his way, you told yourself. You didn't want to be a nuisance after all. Content with your simple plan to keep the peace between your new roommate, you ambled out of the dorm and made your way back to your apartment to read the information packet and get yourself packed for the move. Your year at U.High was going to be an interesting one, that was for sure. Sunday afternoon looked strangely intimidating as the day came to a close, the setting sun casting a warm orange glow over your new balcony. The end of the day marked the completion of your third full day living in your new campus dwelling, and Monday was going to bring with it 20 rambunctious teenagers who were likely suffering from some kind of trauma from all they had experienced prior to and during summer camp. It suddenly dawned on you that Principal Nizu definitely knew what he was doing when he assigned you to Dormitory 1A. Having a counselor on hand at all hours of the kids' downtime was most likely crucial to increasing morale and self-confidence in their own and the others' abilities. There was no denying his genius. With a deep sigh, you turned away from the beauty of the setting sun, feeling the lingering warmth hit your back as you retreated back inside past the glass sliding door. Closing the door behind you, you clicked the latch shut and pulled lightly for good measure to ensure the door was locked securely. Satisfied, you padded across the cool wood of your shared living space, fully intending to make your way to your room to retire for an early night. A barely discernible grunt, that seemed to emanate from the sofa a couple of meters from the fancy widescreen television, had you turning slowly towards its source. There your eyes landed on none other than your roommate and colleague, Shoyuta Aizawa. Arms hanging rather awkwardly at your sides, you paid no mind to your slightly hunched posture as you shrugged. Just hanging out? Good idea before the inevitable storm hits tomorrow. I read about your class, colorful kids. Aizawa huffed and his tired eyes flickered down to the packet he was holding, the paper all crumpled as if he had been poring over the documents like he was planning to go to war. Though, from what you had read about the kids of Class 1A, you couldn't blame him. Turning his gaze back up at you, he shrugged back, reflecting your lethargy perfectly. They're a nightmare, but they're my nightmare. Though exasperated, there was a twinge of fondness to be found amongst the annoyance. You raised your eyebrows at him but remained quiet as you waited for him to say more. He went back to looking at his papers, shuffling through them before pulling out a floor plan with the students' names on it. There, on the first floor, was the main living space for the students, as well as the laundry room and the kitchen. Then Mineta, Midoriya, Aoyama and Tokoyami were assigned to rooms on the second floor. The third floor was to house Jiru, Hagakure on one side and Kuda, Kaminari, Ida and Ojiro on the other. The fourth would be home to Uraraka and Ishido on one side and Shuji, Kirishima and Bakugu on the other. You nodded in understanding as you saw Bakugu's room placing. He seemed to get along best with Kirishima after all. The fifth floor would house Yaoyorozu and Azui on one side, then Sato, Todoroki and Siro on the other. As for you and Aizawa, the both of you got an entire half of the second floor all to yourselves, opposite to the four boys assigned to the second floor. You knew he was just a boy, but you hoped that Mineta would behave himself. I finished the room assignments based on how well they get on with each other. Hopefully we can avoid war tomorrow and get them all settled. He suddenly sighed and raised his hand to run his fingers through his unkempt hair. You noticed it looked way smoother than he let on. I assigned Mineta to a room close to the advisor's dorm just in case. He narrowed his eyes, nostrils flaring in telltale annoyance. Then, of course, Tokoyami due to the nature of his quirk. He's a good kid, but he's got a way to go yet before he can control Dark Shadow at his own whim. His mother apparently checks in on him every few hours through the night just in case. I don't want to coddle any of the kids, but I suppose her request for supervision through the night is reasonable given Tokoyami's quirk and his current command of it. You simply nodded, taking in the wealth of information Aizawa was pouring from his mind. He wasn't one to simply chat because he felt like it. He wanted you to note all this down for future reference. Girls and boys are split down on each side of the floors. We'll take it in turns to patrol at random times through the night to ensure nothing unsavory is happening, though after I'm done with them in class they shouldn't have the energy to get into any mischief. The corner of his lip lifted slightly, pleased with himself, before his face grew impassive once more. Questions? You shook your head. Fair call. It all sounds good to me. Just You mused to yourself before voicing your concerns. I know they're all at least 15, but they're still kids. What if they need us during the night, especially these next few weeks while they're still adjusting to the move? Aizawa blinked up at you, expression deadpan. They can talk to you. You blanched immediately at the prospect of losing sleep. You were a little precious about your sleep, okay? You loved that well-deserved rest at the end of your day, and you were always admittedly a little on the grouchy side when you didn't get at least 6 to 8 hours of sleep per day. What about you? You couldn't help but protest. He had the gall to roll his eyes at you, and you quickly realized that you were devolving into an actual stupid argument with your new roommate. How ordinarily exciting. I'm on patrol most nights. Hero work. To illustrate his point, Aizawa pulled his golden-plated goggles out from under his scarf. You toned your indignation way down at his explanation and nodded in defeat. Right? I forgot you've got a whole other life outside of you. Aizawa hummed gruffly in affirmation before standing, taking his papers with him. He didn't spare you another look as he made his way back to his room. I'm off. Prepare yourself for tomorrow. I'll see you in the morning. You nodded, your nighttime greeting slipping out automatically before you could think to stop. Good night. He paused at his door, and then raised his hand in acknowledgement before disappearing behind it. You stared at his door in bewilderment and shrugged before turning back to your own room, shutting the end of your day outside, only to get yourself prepared for what was to come the following day. Bakugu, is this yours? Lady huh? Nicey. Kaminari, get your Pikachu but face over here with my posters right now or I'll kill you. Everyone, calm down, use your inside voices. This is your class president. Listen to me. Aya. Kaken, I'm sorry. I think I stepped on one. WHAT. Deku, you piece of shit, come. I'll F you up. Bakugu, it's just a stupid poster. Leave Deku alone. The F you just say? You stared helplessly at the cacophony of teenage drama, heightened by their natural rambunctious nature and excitement to be living with their friends and fellow classmates. Or, at least for the most part, you assumed it was excitement. The way Katsuki Bakugo was glaring with pure murderous intent at his peers had you inching forward on your toes, ready to intervene before any mishaps occurred. And to think only an hour had passed since the kids were led into the dorms. You very seriously considered stepping forward when you saw the explosive sparks bursting from Bakugo's palms when you spotted a familiar black-clad figure move past you. You heard his exasperated sigh before his capture weapon shot out to wrap the hot-headed teen in a tight embrace. You shifted your attention from the kids to Aizawa and noted that his hair was standing up on end, defying gravity as his capture weapon seemed to grapple with an unseen wind around him. "What did I say about using your quirks in the dorm?" His voice was laced with exhaustion, and though you couldn't see his face, you could tell that Aizawa most likely looked dead on his feet as usual. For a man who carried a sleeping bag around with him wherever he went, he didn't look very well rested. Bakugo glared at his teacher but relented as his hands curled into fists beside him. He shook with the effort to control his impulse to blast his peers away from him. You wondered why the kid was so angry. The poster that had been stepped on must have been a favorite of his? You couldn't be sure. It seemed like the kid was always looking for an excuse to blow off some steam. "Shut up. I fucking know," Bakugo growled. Aizawa's hair fell back limp around his shoulders, and you noticed how his stance went from being tall and upright to slightly slouched and completely lethargic again. You stifled a laugh that was growing in your belly, threatening to burst out your throat and make its mirth known. Your roommate was a strange man. You didn't really know what to think of him yet. You knew that he was a strict, yet extremely dedicated teacher. Sure, he took naps during class time, but his classes were always the ones that turned out the most long-lived heroes within the community. He wasn't pinned down by tradition or predetermined expectations. He taught his students to go beyond, plus ultra style. His teaching philosophy and his physical appearance was the best example of cognitive dissonance that you had ever come across in your day-to-day life. Shoyuta Aizawa was a mystery to you, and didn't know how long it would take for you to figure out what the man was all about. All you knew about him was the very little you gleaned out of the grand total of 2 conversations you'd had with the man, as well as the little you found out about him as Eraserhead online. You found out that he was an underground hero, a man who served the people of his community well away from the spotlight. You'd heard about his single-handed feats at USJ from other staff members, and you found gaze drifting to the scar that sat right below his right eye, a trophy of sorts proving that Eraserhead wasn't a hero to be messed. This point was highlighted yet again by what had happened during the summer camp only a few weeks back. You heard about what he'd done, though drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness, he'd lifted his head and activated his quirk to save one of his students. You'd heard Hizashi speaking to Tashinori in passing about Tsuyu Azui, the cute girl whose quirk likened her to the abilities of a frog. He'd saved her life with the last of his energy. He really had gone beyond for his students. And you heard about how he'd run into the fray of battle again and again until he could account for his students. He'd beaten himself up about Katsuki Bakugo's kidnapping. You didn't have to be a genius to see how stressed he'd been during the press conference addressing the incident at the camp. He genuinely knew his students and cared about each and every one of them. He'd called them nightmares. But he'd called them his nightmares. You couldn't help but smile as you watched Aizawa amongst his students, standing intimidatingly over Mineta as he advised him to behave after he'd watched Bakugo staunchly stomp his way up towards his assigned room with an apologetic Kirishima in tow. You praised yourself for learning all the students' names last night. Miss L/N? A soft, almost timid, call of your name jolted you from your reverie. Turning towards the student who had approached you, you quickly noted her rosy cheeks and wide brown doe eyes. She blinked up at you curiously and you couldn't help but smile back in return. "Uraraka, right? Anything I can help you with?" She nodded, clearly pleased that you already knew her name. Her excitement quickly flatlined though, happy expression turning back to troubled as she stared up at you with wide eyes. It's kinda silly but I feel kinda bad." You regarded Uraraka with a pensive expression, intent on listening to the girl's problems. You had read her file and noted that she was from a lower middle-class background. The dorms were quite new and fitted with state-of-the-art facilities for the future pro-heroes. You had a feeling that you knew what the issue was. Why do you feel bad? You prompted gently. She sighed and shrugged dejectedly. My parents, how are they going to pay for all of this? They were barely able to afford the rent for my apartment. You cut her off gently before she could get any further with her doubts and worries about finances. Pressing a gentle hand to her shoulder, you squeezed reassuringly. The school's taking full responsibility towards maintaining your safety, along with the rest of the students. Your parents aren't being charged for any of this and never will be. Uraraka's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You noted that this must have been an issue that had sat heavy on her mind on the lead up to her move-in to the dorms. Really? They're not gonna sacrifice everything they have just to put a roof over my head anymore. You smiled, hoping that you'd calmed her fears as you nodded. In all honesty, you didn't really know the full extent of her family's financial standing and exactly what kind of cash they were forking out to ensure their daughter could attend the school of her choosing, but you were positive that Principal Nizu had assured that the accommodations were fully sponsored by the generous donations of the pro-heroes that made up the school faculty. You would know, you contributed quite a lot of cash to the cause yourself without a second thought. You just wanted the kids to be okay. I'm 100% sure. Don't you worry about it. Just focus on your studies and your training, let the adults worry about all this other small fry stuff, okay? Uraraka sniffled but nodded her head, a determined glint in her eyes. I will. You grinned and reached out, unable to help yourself as you ruffled her hair gently. Excellent. Now how about you head on up and unpack your room? We've got a couple of hours before dinner's served. Uraraka grinned and pumped her fists in determination. Okay. Did you need help with dinner? You laughed and shook your head. You were well aware that from tonight onwards you would be cooking for 20 growing teenagers, as well as yourself and Aizawa. Your eyes flickered over to the mystery of a man who seemed to now be snoozing against the wall under the pretense of watching his students flitter around the common area to congregate before making their way up to their respective rooms to unpack their luggage and settle in. Your lips parted in a short sigh as you pulled your sleeves up and made your way to the kitchen. If you were going to have a meal prepared for all the kids and Aizawa on time, then you needed to start preparing now. You were just sprinkling in the last bits of seasoning into the spicy tofu stew you were making when you felt a light tap on your shoulder. You fully expected one of the students to have approached you, so when you turned around and found Aizawa's strained obsidian eyes staring back at you, you were more than surprised. Luckily for you, you schooled your expression into a pleasant smile as you greeted him. Aizawa, ready for dinner? The question was weirdly domestic. You immediately felt your cheeks flushing at the familiarity you had unknowingly forced upon him. He didn't seem to mind, or even care, that you were being overly familiar. Sure, I'll go get the students. He turned to move out of the kitchen, and you sputtered dumbly as you reached out to stop him with a hand to his upper arm. You held him in place, belatedly noting that you had touched him without his permission. That, and he was pretty firm under his usual get-up. It shouldn't have been such a surprise. He was a pro-hero after all. Wait, help me set the table and then we'll split up to get them together. He turned to you with a raised eyebrow, and then nodded with a scoff that seemed to be disguising a laugh. I actually forgot about setting the table. This is going to take some getting used to. He turned back towards you and moved past you towards the cabinet. You kept your eyes on the meal you had just finished cooking, giving it one last stir before taking the ladle out. You narrowed your eyes at Aizawa's back in thought before throwing caution to the wind. He seemed to be acting casual enough to not think anything much of your domestic gestures. You were just another member of staff reaching out to make the living arrangements easier to the both of you. That was all. It wasn't like you were trying to have him warm up to you. Not at all. Hey, could you just come here and check if the seasoning's okay? Aizawa turned to you, his tired eyes meeting your own wide ones. Bowls in his hands, he made his way towards you and simply opened his mouth. You blinked at him, ladle still in your hand. Should I just pour this in? You gestured at the ladle. This actually elicited a snort of amusement from the man. A finger will do. Your eyes widened. What? Finger. Dip it in, then bring it to my mouth. That's unsanitary, Aizawa. He shrugged. Your hands are clean, and there's no point getting a spoon dirty for no reason. You're wasting time. He raised his eyebrows at you, like asking you to put your finger in his mouth was a completely normal and acceptable thing to do. Cheeks beginning to burn, you followed his instructions, bringing your index finger with the broth on it close to his lips. You felt like you could combust on the spot as his lips parted, and he took the tip of your finger into his mouth. Remained on yours as he hissed slightly, and you felt his tongue skim over your fingertip before he opened his lips back up and let your captive finger go. You didn't dare breathe as he nodded in approval before moving past you towards the dining table. Tastes good. I'll finish setting the table, you bring the food over, and then we'll go get the kids. You gulped and squeaked in assent before doing as he said. Cheeks hot and flushed, you couldn't get the feeling of his lips and tongue out of your mind for the rest of the evening. Shoyuta Aizawa. Did he even know what he had just done to you? Not only 3 days into living with him and you were already heading down a rather dangerous path. You hoped that the kids would serve as enough of a distraction to keep you preoccupied from falling deeper into the hell that Aizawa was pulling you into. It was completely unfair. He snuck up on you, all stealth and skill, and now you were intrigued beyond all reason. You knew he wasn't your type, scruffy and lethargic and completely unkempt. But he was making it hard for you to keep your eyes off him. You were drawn to him, more out of curiosity than anything. But the stunt he just pulled, knowingly or not, really hit you hard. How could he think that was acceptable? Was he just oblivious to the concept of personal space? He didn't seem the type to be. But then again, he wasn't exactly adherent to mainstream ideas and social constructs, as you'd so far gathered with your limited data and intel. That evening, once it was lights and out and the kids were all back in their rooms, you were about to retire for the night yourself when you heard a knock on your door. Heart beating hard in your chest, you made your way towards it and opened it to reveal the impassive face of your roommate. Hi Aizawa. What brings you here? He blinked at you before handing you a piece of paper. You looked down at it and realized it was the floor plan for the students' rooms. You shot him a curious look. I've got a copy of this already. I'm heading out on patrol. I go out every night except Saturday night. Thought I'd give you my annotated floor plan before I go. Check on Tokoyami and Hagakure through the night. They're both most likely to have trouble sleeping in a new place, though they're never going to admit it themselves. Be discreet about your checks. Oh, and make sure Minetta's in bed and not trying to get into the girls' rooms. He shook his head with fond exasperation. His eyes met yours again, and your chest felt comfortably warm as you felt endeared towards how much he cared about his students. Try check on everyone if you can, but the 3 I mentioned are the ones you should focus on. Oh, and maybe Uraraka too. She looked upset earlier, but whatever you said to her really lifted her spirits. Thanks for that. You nodded, though you were surprised he noticed your interaction with Uraraka. You thought that he'd been snoozing against the wall. No worries. Leave it to me, good luck out there. You couldn't help yourself as you grinned up at him. He nodded and raised his hand in farewell as he turned away from you. Thanks. See you in the morning. Yeah, you couldn't help but feel giddy at your interaction with him. See you then. The familiar warmth and dreamy feeling that took over all your cognitive faculties screamed at you in warming. Oh gods, you were falling and you were falling fast. And you reminded yourself again, it had only been a few days since you lived with Shoyuta Aizawa. This was not ideal. All things considered, you settled into dorm life in such a way that it all seemed to coincide with a new definition of normal. You'd wake up in the morning and find Aizawa stumbling out of his room looking like absolute death as he trudged his way over to the coffee pot to brew some fresh caffeine to last him through the first half of the day. You woke up early to make a few brief notes on your nighttime checks on the students to pass on to Aizawa over breakfast. He'd read them off his phone with disinterest, and would simply nod your way to acknowledge your efforts. You made breakfast for all of the dorm's occupants with the surprising help of none other than the hot-headed Katsuki Bakugo. He was surprisingly adept in the kitchen, and when you had asked where he'd learned his skills from, he begrudgingly admitted that he helped his mother out a lot back when he was living at home. Of course he had told you to shut the F up immediately after divulging that piece of information, but you hadn't missed the way his eyes softened a little at the mention of his old family routine. You tucked that tidbit of information away in a mental file for Katsuki Bakugo and went on with your day as per normal. 3 weeks worth of the same mundane routine, and only one particular memory seemed to replay time and time again in your mind with vivid accuracy. His lips wrapped around your finger, his warm tongue, wet and stuck against your fingertip. The intense eye contact that sparked a strange longing in you that you'd thought you were in full control of. After all, he wasn't supposed to be your type. Your type was more lively, you know? The type of person who was supposed to be partial to dragging you out to enjoy your life like there was no tomorrow because you couldn't be bothered taking the initiative to do so yourself. You were the all work, no play type of woman, and your idea of self-care was sitting idly in your room with a bag of crisps and a new book fresh off the shelf for countless hours until the new week was to start once more. Shoyuta Aizawa wasn't exactly inclined to the sloth life, as you coined your own use of your free time, but he wasn't exactly Mr. Party all night either. He used his time methodically, running on carefully scheduled nap breaks to keep himself functioning at a level where he could continue being the efficient and rational human being he prided himself on being. But by the gods, he was adorable in that ghastly yellow sleeping bag of his, napping away seemingly without a care in the world. In his resting state, he looked incredibly innocent. The fact that his perpetually bloodshot eyes were hidden under thick dark lashes that grazed at his high cheekbones was also quite a nice sight. He didn't look as intimidating. The kids would definitely agree with you on that front. Lost in your troublesome musings about your roommate, you barely registered the frantic knocking at your bedroom door. Eyes widening in realization, you gasped before leaping up from your bed and rushing to open the door. Breathless, you blinked up at Aizawa, who had his arms folded, his gaze narrowed at you. Everything okay? He had the decency to sound concerned despite the clear exasperation in his expression. You gulped, still reeling from your rush to answer the door. It was way past the appropriate time for him to be knocking on your door given the time of the evening. And it wasn't even a school night, so it most likely had nothing to do with school business. Your heart rate sped up and you had no idea how to calm yourself down. Demon you and your hopeful romantic self, he wasn't supposed to be your type. Down girl. I could ask you the same thing, given you're the one standing outside my bedroom at 1 in the morning. The sass that poured out of you was unstoppable, and you fully blamed it on the mere fact that your brain tended to stop functioning properly after 11 in the evening. Aizawa smirked slightly at this. It was just a slight upward tilt of the right corner of his lips, but Diamond did he make smirking look good. Fair point. I've come to ask a favor. Yeah. He tilted his head forward towards your room. May I? Internally, you were freaking out. A man wanted to enter your room. Willingly. And not just any man. This was pro-hero Eraserhead. Externally, you nodded calmly and stepped aside to let him in. Make yourself at home. You gestured inside, though your fingers were shaking. You want something to drink? He stepped inside and boldly took a seat on the edge of your bed. Posture slumped, he let out a short sigh, bringing his hand to his forehead and gently pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked tired, so much more than usual. You couldn't help the frown that made its way onto your face as you pulled up your desk chair and wheeled it closer to the bed to sit opposite your late-night guest. This wasn't as CC as you'd initially thought it would be. He heaved another sigh and began talking. I won't beat around the bush. It's late and I'm wasting your time on something that's got nothing to do with you. I'm just aware that I can't keep running from the effects of my trauma. Your eyes widened. Aizawa came to you for your expertise in the middle of the night. He came for help. Your disposition softened, though you kept your tone professional. You know as well as I do that I am bound by a professional code of ethics as a registered psychologist, you began. You watched him closely as he nodded. His fists tightened on his lap and he turned his head away, jaw clenched. Of course. I shouldn't have imposed myself. That's not to say, you interrupted quickly, smiling as his head shot up and his bloodshot gaze locked with your warm eyes. I can't be a shoulder to lean on as a friend. Aizawa slumped further forward, completely lax as if all of his energy had been completely drained from his body at your words. Almost like he could finally let his guard down after being on high alert for so long. A friend, huh? His voice was soft, calculating even, until he huffed with dry humor. I could use a friend who will listen. Hizashi's great, don't get me wrong, but he's more a talker than a listener. He honed in on you with those serious obsidian eyes of his, and for a moment his whole expression was softer than you'd ever seen it. I just want someone to listen. You nodded. I'm all ears. And just like that, you heard it all. His fears, his hopes for his students, the gruesome vivid imagery from his nightmares and his cloying insecurities that had you re-evaluating your whole perspective on the man behind the hero. And despite learning the deepest and darkest of his fears, watching him walk out of your room with his usual lazy wave, you couldn't help but think that he was the most incredible man you'd ever had the pleasure to meet. Gods, it looked like you had a new type. A week had passed since Aizawa had poured his heart out to you in your bedroom, and things were normal between the two of you. Being friends didn't change anything about the sharp greetings and the cold-shouldered half-interactions between the two of you. You didn't really mind though. Aizawa had his own agenda, and you had your own things to focus on as well. He wasn't the only one who was working 2 jobs after all. Being a counselor at UA. Yaoyorozu please? You heard Class 1, as Vice President sighed quietly before she responded to Kaminari. I would lend my notes to you, really I would. But I've already loaned them to Kirishima. You heard Bakugu grunt from his place at the dinner table, books spread out around him as he summarized his notes from his provisional hero licensing course. That idiot's got my fucking notes too. Greedy BSRD. Kaminari let out a wounded whine. This isn't fair. Miss L/N. Kirishima's being AD. You shook your head and stepped closer to placate the boy. Now, there's no need to call him names. Can't you both just share the notes and study together? Narrowing your eyes at Kaminari, you continued sternly. In fact, can't you make your own notes in class? He shrunk back with a nervous laugh, avoiding your gaze. Well, you know, I kinda just get so enthralled by all the lectures that I forget to take notes. You nodded, expression deadpan as you crossed your arms in front to you. Right? Of course you do. You sighed and turned towards the kids' dorms to check in on Kirishima. You wondered why he needed 2 sets of notes in the first place. Something wasn't sitting quite right with you about the whole situation. It wasn't like the hot-blooded hero in training to hog up the resources. As you made your way up towards the 4th floor, you noted that the kids who were undertaking internships with their chosen pro-hero agencies had pretty much withdrawn from the rest of their classmates. Out of the 5 students who had secured their internships earlier on that anticipated, Kirishima was the one who seemed to be lagging behind the most in terms of classwork. Standing in front of the cheerful redhead's door, you knocked gently. Kirishima? You in there? You heard some shuffling before the door opened up to reveal the tired boy. Still, he smiled up at you with his usual zest. Miss L/N. His smile dropped, concern filling his expression. Is everything okay? You couldn't help but laugh as you stepped aside and leaned against the door frame, posture relaxed and expression pleasant. Everything's fine, not to worry. I'm just here to check on you. I heard you're hitting the books pretty hard. He winced at the mention of studies and nodded sheepishly. Well, yeah, I don't want to fail my midterms. My internship with Fat Gum has been awesome, and working with Tamaki has been incredible. Like, no wonder he's part of the top 3 of U.A. Enthusiasm leaked into his tone as he pumped his fists with determination. I want to be a manly hero, someone who is strong enough and smart enough to protect people. I need to study real hard in my downtime when I can. Who knows what will be called out on duty, you know. You nodded in understanding. It was true, the kids were granted authorized leave in an instant when their internship agencies called for them. Sometimes you found yourself mourning for their lost childhood. The burden of a hero was not one for kids as young as your charges to be taking on. Still, it was their dream, and it would be cruel to discourage them from being the best heroes they could be, what with the opportunities they were afforded in the professional sphere so early on. True, but maybe take it easy on using more than one version of the same notes? It could confuse you. Kirishima had the sense to blush at being caught out. Yeah, I guess I was just overcompensating. Sorry, Miss L/N. You shook your head and couldn't help yourself as you reached over to ruffle his hair in a warm gesture. No need to apologize, kiddo. You're not in trouble, it's just some advice. Come down with the rest of your internship mates in a couple of hours, okay? Dinner will be ready and you all need to eat solid meals to perform your best out there in society. Kirishima's crimson eyes warmed with determination as he cheered his agreement. Yeah. You nodded and turned to check on the rest of the students who were holed up in their rooms before you ventured back to your common area. Having confirmed that the rest of the students were studying or resting, you entered your common area, only to come face to face with Aizawa. His goggles were slung around his neck, visible from underneath his capture weapon. You tilted your head at him in question. He shook his head at you and held his hand up. He didn't want to discuss it. I'll be back in a few hours. Just make sure these problem children don't kill each other. You nodded, remaining silent. He clearly didn't want to be spoken to. He was thinking deeply. You didn't want to be the one to disturb him in the middle of an important thought. You weren't a pro after all, not anymore anyways. You didn't know the burden that he carried. You didn't know the burden that any of the students in her heroics course carried anymore, what with all might having retired. Averting your gaze, you focused on keeping the affronted look off your face as he walked past you. You told yourself that you weren't upset by your so-called friend's cold shoulder. You told yourself that you weren't upset with the fact that you couldn't ever understand the hero's plight because you had given up the hero's path 2 years into your pro-hero career. You'd been Aizawa's underclassman. You very recently realized this. He'd been in his last year at UK when you had started. Of course, the two of you didn't pay much attention to each other. He wasn't one for the limelight and your heart wasn't set on becoming a hero at all. Your quirk wasn't very suited to hero work anyways. The way you were able to calm hostile situations with a simple look into one's eyes was more a support quirk than anything else. It's what made you the perfect counselor. Serenity. That had been the hero name you'd chosen for yourself when you dared to think you had a chance at serving on the front lines. Back when you'd been deluded into thinking that you stood a chance against the dastardly evils the new world full of quirks had to offer. Y/N. You started and blinked, snapped out of your reverie as you locked eyes with Aizawa. He remained at the front door, hand on the door knob and his brows furrowed in obvious concern. Your heart skipped a beat at the gesture. He was such a softy. Oh yes? Sorry. I wasn't paying attention. Obviously. Aizawa's lips pulled up slightly before dropping down to its usual frown. I was just saying that Azui, Uraraka, Midoriya and Kirishima will most likely be called out of class within the next week. I'll be accompanying them as well. You couldn't help yourself, you were too curious not to ask. Is this what's been keeping you away during your days off as well for the past couple of weeks? Aizawa paused with a slow blink before he hardened his gaze. I'm not at liberty to say. It's not something to be discussed with unauthorized third parties. You're discussing it with me now, aren't you? You challenged. He clenched his jaw at this. I don't have time for this. Just listen and let me be on my way. That's all I'm supposed to do then? Just listen when you need to get things off your chest, and then keep it all shut in when I'm barely in the loop to begin with. The words just spilt out from your lips, the contempt you held deep in your heart from the used feeling you harbored for weeks since Aizawa had first spilled his guts to you all those nights ago. You flinched as his gaze hardened, and you knew then and there that you'd effed up big time. This is hero business. You're just a civilian. There was the big blow. Just a civilian. Yeah. Which is why I'm an employee at the best hero school in Japan, right? I'm just a civilian. He sighed heavily, glaring your way. Don't be ridiculous, L/N. You're not being rational right now. No. You couldn't stop yourself. You don't get to pull that FING rationality card on me whenever you think discussing something further is a waste of time. Those students you just mentioned, they haven't been their usual selves, and as a child welfare officer at this school I can't just ignore their deterioration. They're pushing themselves too hard and it's not fair on them. I'll tell you what I told those kids on their first day here at UA, so listen well. Aizawa spoke coldly. You shivered at his tone, but didn't relent as you glared him right in the eyes, refusing to back down. You hadn't yet activated your quirk, but then again, you didn't play foul in everyday confrontation. That would be cheating life, and you weren't a cheater. The world's not fair. It's not all fun and games when you're dedicated to being a hero. Some people, he shot a scathing look your way, and in that moment you knew that he knew everything about your past as a failed hero, don't understand the limitless passion that is thrown into being the peacekeepers in society. Some people don't want to make the sacrifices necessary to thanklessly protect people. My students know what they signed up for, and I, as their teacher, believe in them in a way I can't expect anyone else to do. If you don't want to believe in their dreams and their capability to achieve them, then that's your choice. I'm not going to write my students off, I'm going to fight alongside them as equals. You didn't realize you had spilt tears until Aizawa's gaze softened. You sniffled and turned away before he could say anything. Fine. Just good luck and be safe. You defiantly turned your head up to look him in the eyes again, even though you desperately wanted to run away and hide yourself in all your shame in your room. I'm allowed to say that, at least as a civilian to a hero, right? Aizawa looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know whether he was supposed to look at you or whether he was supposed to look away. He coughed slightly, clearly feeling awkward after having made you cry with his harshness. You're a friend. No. I'm just a civilian. Y/N. The sound of your name leaving his lips, in his voice, it was strange. It wasn't bad or anything, just strange. Too familiar. Too NTMT for someone who acted so cold. You hated that he had such a pull on your emotions. He wasn't supposed to make you feel anything. Yet here he was, hurting you, then making you feel warm, and then leaving you confused. Go on, you whispered. You're gonna be late, Aizawa. You averted your gaze and heard him sigh. You heard him open the door up, and then heard his pause again. Hey, when I do come back, I'll tell you everything. I know I'm in, but sometimes, and I'm not denying it, most of the time I'm an a-hole because I just say things how it is. He sounded uncomfortable as he spoke. Still, you're a huge help with the students, and I don't say it enough. So thanks. You didn't look up, you simply raised your hand and offered him a thumbs up of acknowledgement. And, he continued, sounding almost sheepish, if you persisted with the hero route, you could have easily been ranked within the top 10. You snorted at his disbelief written over your confused, teary face. Shut up and get out of here, Eraserhead. And, thanks. He offered you a smile then, a real smile, and you dreaded the feeling that had you soaring higher than the heavens as he waved goodbye and left you behind in the safety of your dorm apartment while he and an assortment of your assigned students were off to face who knows what for who knew how long. Great. I can't even pick a fight with him without falling deeper. You groaned as you flopped back onto the couch. You allowed yourself a few minutes of reprieve before you went back down to join the students in the dorm's common area. You could feel confused later. Right now, you had some rambunctious students to oversee, feed, and entertain for the evening. 5 days had passed since you'd last seen Shoyuta Aizawa in person. You found yourself rushing to the university hospital that Principal Nizu had called you from. He had urged you to come quickly, but had also ensured you that your students and fellow dorm supervisor were recovering well. The fact that recovery was necessary at all had you worried sick. It hadn't been very long since Class 1A and 1B were fighting for their lives at what was supposed to be a challenging but nonetheless fun high school camp experience. It hadn't been long at all since All Might's retirement, and to you it definitely felt like it was much too soon for yet another incident to happen where the kids of Class 1A were injured so badly that they had to be hospitalized. And then there was Aizawa. Did that man not have any sense of self-preservation? He called Izuku Midoriya a problem child any chance he could get, but you were beginning to think that Shoyuta Aizawa was just as prone to being problematically heroic himself. You heaved a sigh as you made your way towards the visitors' lounge in the general recovery ward. At least no one was critical as far as you could tell. Principal Nizu smiled up at you from where he was seated on the green plastic hospital chair, cup of tea ever present in his hands, paws, whatever they were. You smiled back, albeit a little stiff from the worry that was plaguing you, and took a seat beside him. Worrying your bottom lip between your teeth, you chanced a glance at your boss, only to note that his smile held a bit of apprehension as well. You let out another audible sigh and turned your full attention to him. Whatever you've called me here for must be really important, Nizu. He nodded solemnly. What happened during the raid tonight was confronting to say the least. Our students, as budding heroes, did a spectacular job as expected. They conducted themselves like true heroes, and I am incredibly proud of them. Our pros carried out the raid as smoothly as it could go. The raid was a success. I don't know anything about a raid. Your blunt tone wasn't missed by Nizu as he had the decency to chuckle sheepishly. It was all confidential, and until all investigations were cleared, we couldn't bring unauthorized personnel into the proceedings. As we've finished settling the legalities now, I think it's now a good time to offer you an explanation. Oh well, thanks. You cut him off dryly. You knew that you were being rude, petty even, but you couldn't stop yourself from venting out your frustrations about the entire scenario. Just because you weren't an active pro didn't mean that your input didn't mean anything. The kids that you were in charge of got injured, and you had no idea what to tell their parents when they had contacted you after the hospital gave them a vague indication that their kids were knocked around during practical hero work. You were made to feel incompetent, and you didn't appreciate that in the slightest. Nizu opened his mouth to speak, pleasant but stern expressions strangely encouraging you to keep your mouth shut for the moment. But before he could even get a word out, the soft depth of a familiar calming voice caught your attention. Nizu, thanks for calling her here. I'll brief her on the raid. You turned from Nizu to regard Aizawa with a critical eye. You weren't very happy with him after all. Just because he was looking more run down than usual, and just because he had his hair tied back in that mess man bun that you couldn't seem to get enough of, didn't mean that you were going to be quick to forgive him. Glad to know the civilian is allowed to know what's going on with the kids she's supposed to be keeping safe. You weren't sure, but you detected a micro-change in Aizawa's facial expression. It was as close to a wince as you were going to get. The expression, no matter how fleeting, brought you deep satisfaction. Pettiness. You were currently doling out spades of it to anyone within range. Aizawa sighed. Stop that. Do you want to hear about what happened or not? You annoyed. You smirked at him, only to falter when he glared down at you. You reined yourself in and gulped, shaking your head as you realized you were probably going a little too far in verbalizing your discontent from the disagreement the two of you had those few days ago. Sorry, fine. I'll shut up. It was a highly sensitive matter. A child's life was in danger. We lost one of our pros during the raid, and as you know, a number of us got moderately to severely injured during the operation. You nodded, urging him with your gaze to continue. From your peripherals you noticed Nizu get up from his spot to make his way towards the reception. Sorry to interrupt, but I must head off now. Urgent business to attend to. The parents of our students must be notified of the incident and briefed fully. You and Aizawa turned to Nizu and nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to each other. You eyed him critically and raised your eyebrows to get him to continue his explanation. He didn't react to your sass. He simply continued to explain the situation as promised. Aizawa stalled suddenly, his eyes narrowing and his fists clenching tight as he snapped his mouth shut. The grim line of his mouth has your sharpened gaze soften out of concern. Seeming to find the appropriate words, he wetted his lips with a silvered flicker of his tongue before continuing. I'll have a copy of Aries' full incident report ready for you within 72 hours. I don't think it would be wise to disclose the extent of her abuse under the care of Overhaul with so many potential leaks around. You nodded quietly. Okay. Aizawa heaved a sigh at your passive acceptance. I said I'd tell you everything, but it's too effed up to even know where to start. His shoulders slumped, and you could finally see just how worn out the erasure hero was in that moment. You bit the inside of your lip to stop yourself from asking him if he was okay. He most likely wouldn't appreciate the question given that he very visibly was not all right. Instead you stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his hunched shoulder. What's she like? Your tone of voice was gentle, coaxing and distracting. You wanted to take Aizawa down a train of thought that didn't revolve around the girl's past. It was clearly affecting him in a bad way. He'd never admit it, but you quickly learned that he adored children. He'd do anything to protect them from the horrors of the world and its people, but when he came across a child who he hadn't been able to protect, he was almost catatonic in his self-loathe. It wasn't right, and it most certainly wasn't healthy. You wanted to make it feel okay again, if only for a little bit of a reprieve. He turned to you and shrugged, though his bloodshot eyes softened slightly at pleasant question. She's tiny. Long hair, kind of blue. One of the corners of his lips curled up as he shut his eyes. He leaned against the wall of the waiting room with his arms folded. She's fond of that problem child Midoriya. She listens well. I'm not sure if I should be happy or concerned. He frowned again, cracking his eyes open. He stared at you for a few short moments, but you stood your ground and stared right back into his eyes until he spoke again. This time he addressed you directly. What do you think, L/N? You think a kid like her could ever have a chance at a normal childhood after being dragged through hell and back over and over again? His voice shook as he finished his question, and while his eyes remained dry, you caught the trembling of his shoulders. Your heart broke for him. Gods, he acted like he didn't give a shit, but he cared all too much. Hey, come here. You opened your arms up to him. He looked down at you, slightly affronted that you dared offer him a hug. You couldn't help but snort with mirth as you took a step closer. You need this. You're hurting, Shoyuta. You didn't even realize you had used his first name as you stepped closer. Argument forgotten for the moment, you focused on comforting the breaking man before you. To your surprise, he stepped forward and curled into you, his cheek resting on the crown of your head. His hands were in his pockets, no longer folded in front of him. He didn't stop you as you wrapped your arms around him and pulled him close. He was a firm presence against you, all lithe muscle and musky warmth. He smelt like coffee and inked paper. You almost laughed at how stereotypically teacherish he was. You squeezed him against you and rubbed his back, unable to stop yourself from considering just how good he felt in your arms. As you massaged gentle circles into his upper back, you heard him sigh. He slumped further against you, and you finally picked up the sense to blush at how close you were to him. The fact that he was letting you hug him was miraculous all on its own. Shoyuta Aizawa was notorious for being antisocial. No one knew anything about his personal life, and the only semblance of affection anyone had ever witnessed from Aizawa came in the form of protecting and tolerating the students and teachers and citizens around him. Friendly interactions for the sake of being comforting and pleasant didn't appear to be Shoyuta Aizawa's cup of tea, and yet, here he was, accepting a hug from the inconsequential roommate with which he'd had a stupid argument with before one of the most confronting missions of his life. Interesting wasn't even beginning to cut it. Shoyuta? You tentatively tried his first name again. Your hands stilled and you simply held him, loose enough for him to step away from your hold if he wished. He stayed put. You relaxed against him despite your better judgment, resting your cheek against his warm chest. His heartbeat was steady, thrumming in your ear through the layers. You shut your eyes and simply listened. Y/N. You felt him pull away slightly and you tilted your head up to catch his expression. It was as empty as ever, though his eyebrows were raised slightly in question. That is your name. You couldn't help but grin at his bemused tone. You felt regret as you pulled away from him and took a step back, feeling a lot colder than you should have as you lost the sensation of his body heat. Exactly, so use it. He scoffed a short laugh. Offering me the same rights over your first name that you took liberties on yourself, huh? A frown adorned your lips as you crossed your arms in front of you defensively. Hey, you didn't seem to have a problem with it when we were hugging. You were hugging. I was simply using you as a platform of support. You gaped at Aizawa, disbelief quickly taking over from the butterflies your interaction had left in the pit of your stomach. Oh, you're literally the worst. He grinned widely at you, and your breath hitched, not out of admiration, but more out of slight fear. Coupled with his tired, bloodshot eyes and his pale skin, the Totoro-esque toothy grin looked borderline homicidal. I know. You stumbled back a few steps, hands outstretched towards him as you shook them frantically. Gods, you're creepy. Stop grinning like a serial killer. I'll stop hugging you, I swear. I never said you couldn't hug me, Aizawa mused, throwing you an amused look. With a pout that could rival a 4-year-old's, you crossed your arms tight and pointedly looked away from him. Though, you couldn't help the way your lips slowly curled up into a smile. At least he wasn't beating himself up about Eri anymore. If you just turned your head towards him, you'd have noticed the tiny smile twitching at Aizawa's own worn expression as he chanced to glance at you before looking the opposite direction. All that aside, I'll be staying with Eri while she stabilizes and recovers. You hummed in acknowledgement and he continued. I hate to do this, but can you assist me with running classes until I get back? Yamada's got all my lesson plans, and you're free to access my room for the supplementary notes and materials for special lessons in the desk in my room. You laughed pleasantly at his question and turned towards him. You waited for his gaze to land on yours before you nodded confidently. Of course. You take all the time you need, I've got this. Aizawa nodded, and you witnessed his shoulders relax completely at your affirmation. It made you happy that you were able to help him out. The guy really took on too much responsibility at times. Surely, it was a good thing that he was finally trusting others enough to share the workload. You have my thanks, Y/N. You felt warm from the inside out. Your name sounded really good in his voice. Yo L/N. How's it going in homeroom this morning? You winced as Present Mike waltzed into class 1, as homeroom with the packet full of the day's lesson plans. He grinned sheepishly and offered you an apologetic look, toning his voice down as he approached you. Sorry, my voice is kinda loud as you know. You nodded, massaging your temples to try to rid yourself of the ringing in your ears. All good, Mike. That's Hisashi to you, my dearest friend. You raised your eyebrows at the eccentric hero. We've barely spoken 10 words to each other, Yamada? He laughed loudly, throwing his head back as if you just told him the world's funniest joke. When his green eyes landed on your inquisitive and incredulous gaze, he smirked knowingly. Anyone on a first-name basis with Shoyuta is a friend of mine. How'd you do it? You blinked at him. Do what? Yeah. What did Miss L/N do? Kirishima suddenly cheered from his seat. You groaned internally, realizing that your wishful thinking that Aizawa's students wouldn't eavesdrop on their teachers during their limited free time before classes began for the day was all for naught. Of course they'd pry. Still, the warm fondness you felt for the kids you looked after in the dorms overpowered your exasperation. You turned to the vibrant redhead and shook your head reassuringly. I didn't do anything, Kirishima. Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry, kiddo. Anything that's gonna happen between your dorm advisors is probably going to be for the better anyways. The gods only know just how badly erasers gotta get it. Get what? Todoroki piped up from his seat close to the back corner of the classroom. You glared at Yamada as you desperately tried to do some damage control. This conversation was both inaccurate and highly inappropriate. You needed to divert the students' attention immediately. Sadly for you, Yamada didn't seem keen on helping you with your self-appointed mission. Nothing. No one's getting anything. Except homework. Lots of homework. You half and half dumb, but the loud fuckers talking about how Aizawa and L/N obviously want to get in each other's breathes. You let out a horrified gasp at Bakugu's inappropriate clarification. Your wide gaze slipped towards Todoroki, who blushed a violent red at the sudden revelation. Oh, it kinda makes sense though. Your heart stopped at Todoroki's uncertain words. What did he mean by that? Yamada snickered beside you as he placed the lesson packet down on the teacher's desk and remained standing at the front of the room beside you to listen to Midoriya's infamous rambling. Mr. Aizawa's temperament is so much more tolerant than before we'd moved into the dorms. He doesn't seem the type to go out of his way to do menial tasks like setting the table for dinner, but he's never failed to be down to help Miss L/N since we moved in. If Miss Y/N is late coming down on the weekends, he paces in the common room until she's down and preparing breakfast. That and, well, he actually eats proper meals now. Todoroki's eyes grew wider and wider with each of his uttered observations. Meanwhile, you felt like you were about to implode with all the confused thoughts and feelings running through your head. Surely the fact that Aizawa was finally being a little social and setting a good example for his students didn't mean what Todoroki was hinting at, right? Surely Shoyuta Aizawa wasn't going out of his way to be a helpful roommate to appeal to you in any way, shape or form, right? You turned to Yamada, eyes wide, like a deer caught in headlights. It can't be that big a deal. Yamada offered you a sympathetic grin as he clasped your shoulder and shrugged. It is. I've never seen him try so hard to meet someone else's expectations. But I don't have any expectations. You sputtered defensively. What? Shooting Yamada a helpless look, Your heart threatened to beat right out of your chest as the thrilling anxiety founded by the possibility that a man like Aizawa could actually be trying to get on your good side. You'd never had anyone try hard for your sake, ever. Well, it seemed like there was a first time for everything. So, Bakugo drawled, sounding bored, when are you and Aizawa gonna F and get it over with? Before you could gasp in shock, Ida did it for you. Bakugo, you can't just ask people about their procreating plans like that. As unstoppable chatter, mixed with heated arguments, exploded about the classroom, Yamada chuckled nervously and edged his way out of the room. Good luck with this. He gestured at the cacophony of destruction that was your beloved Class 1. Bye. You sighed tiredly, resigning yourself as your body felt light and your cheeks grew pleasantly warm as you activated your quirk. The calming effect was immediate as the students all looked at you in a daze, Bakugo included. You smiled and gestured for everyone to take a seat. They obeyed without further prompting. Alright, that's enough on that topic. We've got loads to learn today, kiddos, so open up those notebooks and start taking note of the history of quirk evolution. I'll quiz you on what we learned today, so take this seriously. That was enough for everyone to drop the topic of you and Aizawa getting it on with each other. For now. Gods, you were going to kill Hisashi Yamada. Things had calmed down with Class 1A over the 3 days their homeroom teacher was away on official hero business. That hero business, of course, entailed being the children's court-ruled primary caretaker of little Eri who had been rescued from the evil clutches of the Yakuza mastermind, Chisaki. Midoriya was back in class, and Kirishima had lost a lot of his bandages over the past couple of days. Recovery Girl was working overtime, that was for sure. You let your cheeks warm as you let your quirk wash over the students in a pleasant haze. It was a handy quirk to have, even though the class you were in charge of in the interim was far from hostile. F Deku with your F-Stalker notebook, I'll burn you and all 14 volumes of that shitty analysis to dust. Bakugo, do not intimidate your classmates. Midoriya has not done anything to incite your hellish fury. Ida's arm sliced through the air sternly as he scolded his aggressive classmate. You watched on, dread filling the pit of your stomach as Bakugo got up from his seat, his palms sparking as he bared his teeth at Class 1 as class representative. Up until now, you had been using a milder version of your quirk, at only about 5% of its power. But this situation truly did look volatile. Hellish. Who the F you callin' hellish for eyes? Fight me. Come outside and fucking fight me, I dare, Wyo? Huh. Bakugo's tone changes quickly, calming down and growing softer as you directed your warm gaze his way. You caught his crimson eyes and beckoned him forward. Bakugo, come with me. Everyone else, you sighed and gestured at the books they had open on their desks. Please summarize pages 39 through to 62 for homework. Mr. Yamada will be in soon to begin your English lessons. With that, you led a placid Bakugo out of the classroom and towards the staff room. He didn't argue with you, and when you looked at his facial expression, you found a small smile curling his lips up. He looked very sweet when he wasn't angry. He wouldn't be pleased that you saw this side of him without his consent, that much you knew. Heaving a sigh, you guided him to one of the staff sofas in the staff room and took a seat opposite from him. With the room empty, you could finally use your counseling skills to speak one-on-one with who you deemed to be one of the most fragile kids in the hero course. He'd grown up being told that he was the best, and his quirk and excelled level of mastery at his young age perpetuated that belief. It wasn't until being captured by the sludge villain that Bakugo had realized that he wasn't invincible. Midoriya had acted on his instinct to save, and brought Katsuki Bakugo to the realization that as a victim, he had very little choice in who would come and save him. Whether they were worthy or not, he'd have to take whatever help he could get. He'd very begrudgingly taken Midoriya's help, cussing and swearing through the whole ordeal, from what you'd seen in the tapes archived by mass media outlets, and he'd been given a taste of talents that were either equal to his, or even surpassed his own. Attending UA High had done that to Bakugo, and while he was improving in his cooperativeness and anger management, he was still a child who was subject to gruesome and unfair trauma before his time. You winced as you remembered what Yamada had told you about Aizawa and his teaching principles. He was direct, blunt, and never afraid to get to the point. He always told his students what they were going to face in the real world, and he always made sure that his training regiment would prepare his students for the injustices that waited for them outside the gates of UA High. Still, all of the first-year hero course had experienced first-hand run-ins with villains before their time, and they all lived to tell the tale. All of them had to face the effects of their trauma day in and day out, and they amazed you day by day with their resilient innocence. One moment they seemed wise beyond their years, and then the next they were like little puppies pouncing on one another with gleeful yips and half-hearted barks. You zoned in on Bakugo and relinquished your quirk, watching as his expression morphed from relaxed to confused and then finally to livid. "The F did you do to me, Miss Sunshine?" You blinked at the decent nickname. "It wasn't so bad, you counted your blessings with that one. I placated you using my quirk, and then I guided you here to the teacher's lounge so that I could check in on you." "I don't need you to check in on me. I'm fine," he huffed, face pulled into a scowl. Still, in his eyes you could see a kid who didn't know how to ask for help. It was scared of feeling weak, but you knew better than to call him weak. Katsuki Bakugo was anything but weak. Anyone who thought otherwise had to be a fool. You don't have to be broken to talk about what's going on inside. All the heroes do it. All Might even. Bakugo cut you off with a fierce glare. Don't even talk about him in front of me," he hissed, eyes fixed on his shoes as he leaned over his thighs, elbows resting on them as his hands clasped together. You frowned. "But he's your favorite?" "Yeah, and it's because I was too weak that he's up so bad he had to retire. Because the league thought that I was bad enough to be a part of their up schemes for society. That I'm villain material." Bakugo was screaming at you at this point, and you felt your cheeks grow hot as you offered him a sympathetic smile, trying to calm him as quickly as you could. His shoulders shuddered as he breathed in rasps. He shook his head, eyes welling with tears that otherwise wouldn't have been shed if not for your quirk tearing down all his defenses. He looked at you like you'd betrayed him. "If, are you doing? Stop it. Stop making me look so pathetic. Stop laughing at me." You shook your head, gaze soft as you stood and moved to sit beside your student. Gods, he was hurting so badly. Why did all heroes have to hurt so badly? Why did they have to feel so strongly? Why were they conditioned so tirelessly to be strong, only to break so easily under the taunts of supposed weakness? It wasn't fair. Life's not fair. Hero work's not fair. The world will test you when you leave school, so I will test you here to see if you've got what it takes. Give it all you've got. Show me you all belong here at UA. Aizawa's constant speech to his homeroom class. He'd push them to the brink, and that would be okay, because you'd be there to sew the kids' burst seams back together again when it all became too much. That was your job, and that would be you doing your part to cultivate the future of justice in a world full of superpowers. You're not weak. You're exhausted. You're convinced that you should have been better, but sweetheart, you weren't born a pro. No one is. You chanced a glance at the usually hot-headed student, and only found a young man who was vainly trying to hide his tears from you. You didn't know what had compelled you to reach out and physically hold Bakugo's wrist in a gentle grasp, but you did. "Katsuki, talk to me." You prompted gently. His shoulders caved and he shook his head. "I'm fucking pathetic. I'm not even supposed to be here. I told him to go die, and he still saved me. That's why All Might picked him. That's why he's so effing incredible and I'm just the weakest." Bakugo's breath hitched as he unwittingly spilled all his thoughts and feelings out due to the influence of your calming quirk. You hurt for your student. His suffering was greater than you had imagined. If Bakugo was at this stage, you feared what kinds of thoughts the other kids harbored deep in their hearts. You needed to speak with all of them, there was no doubt about that. All Might cares for you and Midoriya exactly the same. He's your teacher as well. Bakugo's eyes dulled further as he shook his head almost manically. It's different with them, and everyone knows it. He sounded defeated, and you heard him sniffle. It was definitely a different side you were seeing, though you weren't quite sure why he was suddenly candidly baring his heart to you. You dropped the topic of All Might for the moment to help calm Bakugo back to his baseline. "I'm not quite sure how to put this, and I suppose you're more partial to people being upfront, so what's triggered this outburst?" You blinked at the young hothead and waited for him to calm down enough to answer you. Honestly, you were keen on figuring out what was going through that complex mind of Bakugo. As much as he presented himself as a young man driven by aggressive competition, he was intelligent and incredibly perceptive. It was really a strange combination, but one that worked nonetheless. Bakugo rolled his eyes at you and sniffled again, turning his head away from you as he slouched further. Clearly, the situation was catching up to him and he wasn't keen on presenting a vulnerable side for any longer than absolutely necessary. You're the stupid shrink, aren't you? It's your job to help us get over our sheet, right? You nodded with an affirmative hum, understanding dawning on you. A proud smile tugged at your lips as you reached out and gently ruffled the kid's hair. So he wasn't beyond asking for help after all. I don't know about stupid, but yes. I'm the counselor and it's my job to help you guys keep healthy in the mental space. I'm really glad you've reached out. He scoffed and tapped his foot, and you almost mistook it for impatience, if it wasn't for how white his knuckles were from grasping tightly at his elbows with his arms folded tight across his front. He was feeling insecure for even admitting he needed help. You weren't about to twist the knife of humility anymore. He'd had a hard enough time as it is. Yeah, whatever. When do I have to do this again? You smiled softly and patted his back one last time for good measure before you stood to leave the room. You figured Bakugo would need some time to sort himself out before heading back to class, and a driven student like him wasn't about to skip class. You trusted him to be accountable and do the right thing. What time works best for you? You threw the ball into his court. He was silent for a few moments, and you thought that he wasn't going to answer. But he suddenly scuffed his shoe against the linoleum floor and mumbled, I got time after homework. After 8 on Thursdays. You hummed agreeably, right then. Thursdays in Dormitory 1, as staff common room. That sound okay? Yeah. This fucking stinks. You held back and laughed as you shook your head and mentally scheduled the weekly sessions with your first voluntary client from UA High School. It seemed like the kid needed a mentor. No, he wanted a mentor. In all honesty, he seemed really disappointed that all might seem to favor Midoriya. You sighed quietly as you stepped out of the staff room to head back to the classroom. Thanks, I guess. You heard Bakugo mumble, so faint that you almost didn't hear him. A smile truly lit up your face at his gratitude. He was a sweet kid behind all the blast boy persona. You'd have to speak to Aizawa about this. Your whole expression softened at the thought of your colleague and roommate. You wondered how he was going. He'd been away from class for a few days now, and to say that the class was a little bit rambunctious in light of his absence was a bit of an understatement. Besides, you kind of missed seeing him tucked away at the front of the classroom in his obnoxious yellow sleeping bag whenever you dropped by to pick up progress notes on his students. Aizawa loved cats, that was public knowledge. Aizawa had a bit of a sadistic side when it came to his teaching methods, but all in all, he didn't hate the students he decided to keep around. That was also public knowledge. Little kids, though elementary-aged children. Both Aizawa and the public didn't really know how to feel about small kids. Kids who clung to him like a lifeline, or cried when they woke up and found him missing from beside their bed. Kids who refused to go anywhere but where he was because he was the only stability in their life. He didn't know what to do about Eri. He was a pro-hero by night and a teacher by day. Any free time he had, he dedicated it to grading papers and sleeping. Occasionally, he'd go for walks and look for stray cats to pet. He didn't have time to raise a kid. Eraserhead, I have to ask you to cooperate with this case. It's a little more complex than just finding Eri a foster family. Detective Tsukachi winced as Aizawa leveled a glare his way. The kid doesn't want to go anywhere else anyway. Aizawa sighed. I know that. Doesn't mean it's going to take away all the problems that come with taking on a dependent child. Tsukachi offered a sympathetic smile and shrugged. Probably loads better with your living arrangements. Aren't you roomed up with ex-pro Serenity? I can't expect her to take on this bigger responsibility without asking first. Aizawa ignored the fact that Tsukachi seemed to know too much about his life outside hero work. Though he wouldn't put it past Nizu to fill the detective in on every little detail of his life in the name of assisting the investigation. You could call her now? Tsukachi suggested, sounding timid. Aizawa turned to him. his face deadpan. She's teaching right now. Oh. The detective frowned as he scratched the back of his head, looking troubled. Well, I mean, we've got the social workers hounding us to find a placement for little Eri before child protection step in. They've given us 2 hours tops, and then the government's taking it into their own hands. What with the situation with Eri's quirk and her lack of control over it, they're most likely only going to allow you visitations for an hour a week. Only an hour? Idiots, Aizawa muttered, burying his face against his palm with a heavy sigh. He was running out of time, with only one option and ridiculously unrealistic faith in your goodwill. He couldn't care for Eri on his own. He'd need your help. He couldn't let the kid rot in the system and get fed back to the abusive carers she'd just been rescued from again. There was no way he'd allow that to happen. Aizawa glanced through the window where the little girl slept so innocently, tucked in snugly with the little horn on the crown of her head receding every day as she was continuously assured that she was in safe hands. He loathed to admit that kids, no matter their age, were his biggest weakness. He wanted to keep them safe. It was the whole reason he became a hero. He wanted to keep vulnerable children safe. And he wanted them to learn to smile again in the process. Aizawa could be blunt, cruelly so, but he was truly a softie. He cared a lot. Fine, he grunted, shooting Tsukachi a tired glance, eyes rimmed with red, more rays than usual. I'll bring her home. Is there paperwork? For a second, Aizawa's tone sounded pained. He hated unnecessary paperwork. Tsukachi shot him an apologetic smile. Just a little. Legal stuff for the children's court. You'll be served an affidavit in 3 days. I'll do that myself. And then you'll need to come by for the first mention as Eri's representative. Aizawa groaned, feeling exhausted to his bones. Still, he was a hero and he wasn't going to back down just because he was tired. He looked up and took in the peaceful image of Eri sleeping soundly, and punctuated his resolve with a small nod. Fine. It was Friday afternoon, and you were catching up on some marking when the door to your dorm opened up with a soft click. A smile curled up at the corners of your lips and you pushed the papers away from you and made your way out to the common area. Your eyes landed on Aizawa, and then drifted down to the wide eyes of the small girl he carried in his arms. Though confused at her presence, you smiled brightly at her. Welcome home. You cheered brightly, more for the little girl's sake than Aizawa's. I've been looking forward to meeting you, Eri-chan. The girl looked at you, her eyes shining with uncertainty as she whipped her head back to hide at the nape of Aizawa's neck. The sight was precious, and you felt like your heart was going to burst at the sweet image before you. You locked eyes with Aizawa, and noticed just how dead he looked on his feet. Your smile dropped slightly as you stepped forward and spoke again with a softer tone. Hey, Eri-chan. My name's Y/NL/N. You can call me Y/N though. I've got some really yummy cookies on the counter right there. You glanced back at the cookies Sada had baked earlier that evening. The sweetheart had come by and offered you a batch to share with his homeroom teacher. The kids were honestly so sweet, you didn't know what to do with yourself most of the time. You turned your attention back to Eri once more with a slight shake of your head. You want to come try them with me? She lifted her head from her caretaker's shoulder and timidly turned in his arms to look at you. She blinked once, and that appealing curiosity that could only be demonstrated by a child was at play, just as you'd hoped. You let yourself steal a glance at Aizawa, and you were surprised to find that his expression had softened as he watched Eri's reaction to your words. You looked back at Eri before you could let yourself blush at how sweet Aizawa was with small children. He was holding her gently against him, but firmly enough to assure her that he wouldn't let go unless she wanted him to. Am I really allowed a cookie? Her voice was soft and a little high-pitched, just as you'd expected. She was incredibly adorable. Though, the hesitation in her whole demeanor had your chest aching for her. You nodded, eyes bright and enthusiastic as you tried to convey that it was absolutely okay. You're allowed 3 cookies. Aizawa chose this moment to grunt disapprovingly. Only 1. It's almost bedtime. You gaped at him for a short moment before turning apologetic eyes towards Eri. Good point. Only 1 tonight, but tomorrow, we feast. You pumped your fist enthusiastically and winked, knowing full well that you looked a little ridiculous. Still, it had the desired effect. The girl's eyes brightened a little, and she turned her gaze up to ask for silent permission. Aizawa simply bent down and placed Eri on her feet before letting go and turning towards the sofa. As he sat down, he ushered Eri towards you from a distance with his hand. Go on, Y/N's waiting for you. Eat your cookie, and then brush your teeth. You need to be in bed soon. Eri nodded and quickly walked towards you, her strides short and sweet just like her. You almost cried at how adorable she was. As you opened up the container for her, you glanced at Aizawa again and raised your eyebrows. He shrugged and shut his eyes, arms folded across his chest as he slumped further into the sofa. You sighed and took 2 cookies out from the container after Eri hesitantly picked one, and then placed the container back onto the counter. Slowly, you reached out a hand and offered it to Eri with a smile. Wanna come with me to give Mr. Grumpy a cookie? Eri blinked at you, eyes sparking with humor, but not quite letting her smile. Inside you wondered just how bad things had been for the poor girl that she couldn't bring herself to smile at the juvenile humor. While you were pondering, you felt a small hand slip into your own. You looked down and found Eri looking over at Aizawa, who seemed to be dozing lightly on the sofa. Looked like his bedtime was coming up soon as well. Can Mr. Aizawa still eat a cookie if he's sleeping? She whispered. You smiled brightly and gently squeezed Eri's hand, thumb brushing over the raised scars that littered her otherwise smooth skin. You pushed the worry aside for now and nodded. Let's go find out. You led Eri towards Aizawa and let go of her hand. You watched as she climbed onto the sofa beside Aizawa. She held the cookie out to his lips, nudging it gently against his mouth. You caught his eyes flicker, though they remained shut. He opened his mouth and took the cookie between his teeth as he pried his eyes open, only to look right at Eri. Sitting up straighter, he nodded at her as he grasped the cookie between his fingers and took a bite. Thanks, he mumbled between his bite. Gulping, he reached out with his clean hand and ruffled Eri's hair gently. It's good, isn't it? Sad as a good baker. He might make you a cake or something if you ask nicely one day. Your heart warmed at the domestic sight in front of you. You had a lot of questions about this new arrangement, only for logistical reasons. You knew Aizawa was a very busy man. Having Eri in his care, or so it seemed, appeared to be a bit of a miscalculated decision, unless he planned on cutting down on hero work for the time being. Still, as Aizawa and Eri sat side by side eating their cookies in a comfortable silence, you couldn't bring yourself to disturb the peace. Your questions could wait. Bakugu! Stop with the improv. I told you to stick with the original set. Juru screamed. At the interruption, Tokoyami messed up his riff, and Kaminari almost set his electric guitar on fire when his body jolted in shock at Jiru's sudden scream into the microphone. F you, I am making US better. Bakugu screamed back, beating the drums with rigorous fervor as he argued with his band leader. You sighed, arms folded and head shaking from side to side, leaning against the door frame of Jiru's room. She'd left the door open upon Aizawa's request after she had asked him for permission to use her room to practice for the culture festival during their downtime. It was nearing Eri's bedtime, and Aizawa had tasked you with the daunting task of breaking up band practice. With only 2 days before the culture festival was to take place, you weren't looking forward to interrupting. Bakugu, please cooperate. Yayarozu tried, only to find herself in the direct firing line of Bakugu's fiery glare. Why don't you try cooperating together around my mad skills and then we'll talk? Bakugu, everyone. You raised your voice, knocking loudly on the door as you activated your quirk. You felt it do its work, the warmth radiating from your cheeks and into the room, the effect immediate over the 5 of your previously riled-up student. After a few seconds of being exposed to your quirk, the only one in the room to show any signs of aggression was Bakugu. Even then, his shoulders looked a little more relaxed, and his scowl wasn't as pronounced. The F-dash? We were jammin' and sheet. Yeah, and you were also being very loud. Eri's going to bed soon, so practice finishes now, okay? Jiru's jaw dropped, and she shook her head in calm protest. But we've got so much to improve. She shot a mild glare at Bakugu, though he didn't see it, too occupied with expertly spinning his drumsticks over his fingers. I know this isn't a huge deal for Hero Corps students, but we'd really like to give it our all. My room's soundproof if I just shut the door. No, you immediately shot the tentative suggestion down. The crestfallen look on Jairu's face struck ice through your heart, but you didn't relent. Under no circumstances were boys and girls to be found in each other's rooms with the doors closed. Mr. Aizawa would kill us all if we broke the rules. You know he's not going to budge on this. Jairu frowned but let her shoulders sag in defeat as she nodded. Fine, that's fair. But we're waking up extra early tomorrow to rehearse. Bakugu scoffed. Who said I was gonna go to your stupid rehearsal? Jairu glared Baku's way, and you could have sworn you heard Tokoyami let out a disgruntled noise of discomfort at the sight. You stood very still and watched the usually calm girl stare down her hot-headed classmate. A smile threatened to pull at your lips as you observed the two, noticing the telltale signs of reluctant opinion as Katsuki Bakugu grumbled curses under his breath and shoved himself past everyone before finally making eye contact with you at the door. What the hell are you looking at, Miss Sunshine? You kept your arms crossed and tried not to look too smug as you kept your voice low enough for only Bakugu to hear. I'm looking at a young man compromising for a girl they might actually like a lot more than they let on. Oh, shut up, you delusional broad. Bakugu proceeded to flip you the bird and storm out of Jairu's room, much to everyone's amused confusion. You didn't fail to notice the light blush of pink on Bakugu's cheeks as he stormed towards his bedroom. Hey, that's pretty cute. Kaminari's voice was colored with realization as he addressed you much too energetically for the time of evening. You turned back to him with wide eyes. Huh. He grinned. Miss Sunshine, can we call you that too? You surveyed Jairu, Tokoyami and Yayorozu, who looked back at you keenly, asking for silent permission. A sigh escaped your lips as a small, affectionate smile pulled up at their corners. You couldn't say no to your Class 1A kids. Sure. I think Bakuga means it more like an insult, but I agree it's pretty cute, you admitted. Nodding, you raised your hand in final dismissal. All right, practice is over today. Reassemble tomorrow morning for an hour of practice before classes begin. Door open should be a good way to wake all the usual stragglers, you murmured to yourself as you turned from the students. You heard everyone say their goodbyes as they exited Jairu's room, and heard 3 sets of feet patter off towards their own respective rooms. Once you heard Tokoyami's door shut softly, you allowed yourself a quiet giggle before you let yourself into your own dorm. The sight that immediately greeted you was Eri dressed in her cat onesie, clutching Get Teddy Bear to her chest like her life depended on it. Her tired eyes widened slightly as she caught sight of you, and she stood from her spot on the floor and pattered over to you with an uncertain look on her face. Heart sore at Eri's expression, you kneeled down and opened your arms to her. It had been around 3 weeks since Eri had been living with you and Aizawa, and around 1 week ago, Eri finally felt comfortable enough to approach you for cuddles. The girl still didn't smile, and laughter was a no-go for now, but the way her expression would lighten and her eyebrows would unpinch themselves when she was feeling content made you feel like you just won 30 wars. Eri felt warm and soft in your arms as you wrapped yourself around her. She let out a content sigh and nuzzled against your chest, hands limply hanging over your shoulders. You smiled and squeezed gently before lifting her up from the ground and into your arms. Supporting her bottom, you straddled her against your hip and rested your cheek atop her head. Her teddy remained pressed between your body and her own. Good evening, Eri Berry. Are we all ready for bed? Eri hummed quietly in response. Yes, Miss L/N. Mr. Aizawa helped me and brushed my hair for me. She pulled away slightly, using a small hand to grasp at the bottom ends of her hair, lifting them to your eye level for inspection. I like it when Mr. Aizawa brushes my hair. It feels nice. Your smile grew wider as you listened to Eri talk so comfortably about her experiences with Aizawa. Of course, you didn't expect any different. As uncaring as he came off on the daily, it didn't take long for anyone to realize that his adoration for children was innate. He denied being a fatherly figure to anyone young and impressionable, but gods, he was such a dad. I reckon Mr. Aizawa gets lots of practice with his own hair, don't you think? You grinned mischievously. Eri's wide-eyed expression relaxed, and she nodded with a quiet hum of agreement. Mr. Aizawa's hair is really soft. She leaned closer to your ear and whispered, I touched it when he was napping today. You let out a short gasp and reached over with your free hand to tweak gently at Eri's nose. Lucky duck. Eri looked content as she nodded before nuzzling against you once more. You carried her to her bedroom, the smallest room that was supposed to be purposed as a shared study. Both you and Aizawa never elected to use it, and until Eri had arrived, it had only been used as storage for empty boxes and books the two of you were never going to read again. You had both cleared it out in no time and managed to set up a bed, a tallboy of drawers for Eri's clothes, and a wooden chest full of toys and activities for Eri. Aizawa had bought a lot of cat-themed goods for Eri, and you didn't know whether to squeal at how cute Shoyuta Aizawa was, or whether to sigh in exasperation for the terrible taste in clothing for a young girl like Eri. Eri, of course, was enamored with the pro-hero who had taken part in saving her from a terrible life with the Yakuza and their ploy to market a quirk-erasing drag. She had no complaints about anything Aizawa did. You couldn't believe such a appealing girl could have gone through so much in her short life. You paused before her bed and leaned down to settle her on the soft covers. Eri scrambled out of your arms and gently lifted the covers before methodically slipping in, her grip firm on the arm of her teddy. She pulled the plush into her arms, against her chest, and blinked up at you as you pulled her covers up to her chin. Moving in slowly, you gave Eri time to turn away from you. She didn't, and you continued forward until you brushed your lips against her forehead. Good night, Eri Berry. Sweet dreams, and remember, if you feel scared, all you need to do is knock on our doors, okay? Eri nodded. Good night, Miss L/N. Tell Mr. Aizawa I said good night too. He was on the phone when I went to say it, so I didn't want to bother him. Your expression softened further at Eri's hesitance. You nodded and brushed her bangs away from her eyes. Okay, sweetie. I'll let him know. Night. You left Eri's room after one final look at her to ensure that she had shut her eyes and was on the way to dreamland. Eri hadn't had a nightmare in 5 nights now, and you were hoping that she could have another peaceful night's rest. Aizawa had refused to tell you exactly what had happened to Eri for her scarring to be so bad, and you feared asking Eri in case she shut down at the mention of it. Whatever it was, it must have been bad. You decided to be patient and simply wait until Aizawa was ready to tell you exactly why Eri had to be saved. You knew they were using her quirk to manufacture quirk-erasing drags and weapons, but the exact mechanism underlying the manufacture was still unknown to you. If the scarring had anything to do with the process thought, you shuddered and internally screamed at yourself to think about anything else other than the suffering Eri most likely had been through until she'd been saved. Thinking about it and catastrophizing it wouldn't be doing anyone any favors anytime soon. Eri needed a positive female role model in her life, and you were determined to do your best to fill that role. You weren't sure why, but rather than going to your own room, you raised your hand into a fist and knocked quietly on Aizawa's door. With everything that had happened, you hadn't had the chance to simply catch up with your roommate. It wasn't like you were both too talkative towards each other outside your role of being the student's dorm caretaker and their substitute teacher, and their in-home counselor, and Eri's unwitting secondary carer. Okay, so you both shared a lot of responsibilities together. That still didn't mean you got to talk to each other very much. You'd barely pulled your hand from the door when Aizawa pulled it open. He crossed his arms and nodded in greeting. Evening L/N. Eri's gone to bed? You nodded, feeling a little stupid standing outside Aizawa's door. There wasn't really anything to say to him. Nothing that would be worth his while anyways. She said, to tell you good night. You were on the phone when she tried to earlier, so, you trailed off, feeling awkward as his intense onyx gaze bore down into your own tired eyes. I was on the phone with the social workers. The court process is a little complicated because there's no trace of Eri's next of kin anywhere. If push comes to shove, she's going to have to go to a foster home. Your jaw dropped in horror. You didn't want Eri to go anywhere. You'd blissfully forgotten that it was even a possibility. Foster home? But her quirk? And her history? We can't just send her off packing. She's barely comfortable with us. Aizawa sighed and unfolded his arms, tilting his head to signal you into his room. Shut the door. I don't want Eri to make any assumptions on the basis of what she may or may not hear of this conversation, he called over his shoulder, turning to you as he sat on the edge of his bed. You shut the door as he requested, and internally snickered as you realized that you were a girl in a boy's room after curfew. Oh, how scandalous. As you turned to face Aizawa, a few things along the lines of being in a man's room in the evening had dawned on you. The man sitting on the bed, one Shoyuta Aizawa, was wearing a black tank top and loose-fitting gray sweatpants. His shoulders were much broader than you'd imagined, and the sculpt of his musculature was incredible. His arms were strong and sturdy, toned and bulky enough to be noticed, but not so much that they looked disproportionate. You could see the V-shape of his toned torso and the outline of his lithe abdominal muscles, and those sweatpants did nothing to hide those strong muscular thighs of his. It took every fiber of your self-control not to dart your tongue out and lick your lips in clear appreciation of the view. You deluded yourself into thinking that Shoyuta Aizawa was not your type ever since moving in with the scruffy-looking man for work purposes, but that clearly was not the case. Especially not so when you found your hand inching itself down the waistband of your panties, with the thought of your roommate caging you against your mattress from above, smirk set surely on his face, and his eyes roaming your every expression as he played your desired like a fiddle. You were a little flustered when it came to Shoyuta Aizawa. Seeing him be so good with kids just cemented your place in what you dubbed Shoyuta Aizawa hell. Hell had never felt so DMing good though, and you were keen to experience more. Except, looking into Aizawa's tired, unimpressed gaze had you realizing very quickly that he was most likely not interested. Sure, Yamada had hinted that perhaps Aizawa was making an effort to be friendly towards you, but that was surely because you both lived together. It would be terrible to live with someone who you couldn't. He was just being decent because he didn't want to make you feel awkward or unwelcome in your own home. At least that was your reasoning for the out-of-his-way niceties. Y/N. You were startled from your chaotic thoughts as his voice sounded your name out tentatively. You blinked at him and noted the concerned look on his face. Gods, he needed to stop that. He needed to stop all of that. Wait. Your cheeks heated as you belatedly realized that he'd pulled his hair into a loose ponytail at the base of his neck. He looked so good, it should have been illegal to look so good being all scruffy. Sorry. Just, lost in my thoughts. You stumbled over your words, twiddling your thumbs as you stood before him guiltily. He frowned at you and patted the space next to him with an open palm. Sit. I'm not going to bite, you know. At the invitation, you nodded and stiffly sat yourself down, back straight and soles of your feet solidly pressed against the wooden floor. You felt Aizawa's gaze on you, and for the sake of not being weirder than you already were, you turned to him and tried your best to look attentively into his eyes. Yeah, so about Eri? Aizawa narrowed his bloodshot eyes at you and shook his head, turning his body so he was facing you head-on. Before Eri, I've got something to ask you. Your heart stopped at his words. What was he going to ask? Did you do something wrong? Were you being too weird? Was he going to tell you to leave him alone? To not talk to him because you were so dim and annoying? What is it? Your voice came out in a choked whisper, and you hated yourself for sounding so scared. Aizawa clearly heard the fear in your voice and his expression immediately softened. I told you I'm not going to bite. Calm down. Do I really bother you that much? You blinked at him. Your mouth mayhappen opened up a little in a gape of shock, but you couldn't be sure. That wasn't what you had been expecting. That the question? Aizawa turned his gaze away from you and coughed gruffly. Yeah. You're just nervous around me. It doesn't take a genius to see that much. I just wanted to know because if you are feeling uncomfortable, we can always apply for a staff transfer between dorms. I don't want you to feel chained somewhere you don't want to be. Horror bubbled up in your stomach as Aizawa continued to speak in that pragmatic, logical tone of his. Oh? Hell no. You didn't want to go anywhere. Aizawa, Shoyuta, no, that's not it at all. You didn't know what had compelled you to address him by his given name, but the clear expression of relief that flooded his tired face made your own cheeks feel warmer than they already were. You shook your head. I really love my job, and I'm really learning a lot here in Dorm 1A. And the added responsibility with Eri? Aizawa sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he looked at you again. It's not what you signed up for. If you're not feeling up to it, I could make other arrangements. No. You quickly interrupted his train of thought, shaking your head imploringly. No way. Eri is the sweetest little girl, and it's an honor to be her mother figure. The words left your mouth before you could make sense of them. It wasn't until you'd actually spoken them that you realized exactly what you were to Eri, in the grand scheme of things. You, in the 3 weeks you'd been looking after her, were her mother. Aizawa smiled at you. He actually smiled, and it was appealing. That's good, because the courts want Eri to go to a good family, and I've put us forward as her primary guardians. Your world stopped at his words. Wait, what do you mean? You had to make sure what you'd heard Aizawa say was right. He had the decency to look sheepish as he refused to meet your gaze. It was the most logical step forward. I'm the only one who can keep her quirk under control, and you're the only one she seeks out for emotional comfort other than myself. I may have started an extended logical ruse in the court of law for the sake of giving Eri a permanent home. I just need your help to get us over the figurative hurdles, so to speak. Your heart thudded loudly in your chest, so loud that you could barely hear anything but your own anxiety thrumming in your blood. Extended logical ruse? You whispered, eyes wide as you noticed Aizawa's hand in the pocket of those sweatpants you'd just been admiring. Eyes locking back with his, you noted that his expression was one of pleading now. It was clear that he wanted Eri with him more than he was ever willing to let on. So he was attached as well. That was no surprise to you. He was a sweet, sentimental man who liked to show the world he didn't care, all for the sake of protecting those who meant the most to him. He pulled his hand out of his pocket, and between his thumb and index finger, he held a peeling white gold ring with a small glistening diamond decorating the center. Your eyes widened and you shook your head in disbelief. You liked him. You might have been infatuated with him, but this was too much too soon. I might have told the social worker we were engaged to be wed in 2 months' time. Play along and I'll compensate you for everything. Please. You bit your bottom lip, confused but strangely compassionate. You wouldn't lie unless you really wanted her with you, would you? You whispered. He nodded and held the ring out to you. I made a promise to this little girl and I'm going to keep it. I told her that she's safe with me, and so she will be safe with me. Your gaze flickered between the ring and Aizawa's determined expression. You shut your eyes with a heavy sigh and reached out for it. What did you have to lose, after all? Maybe playing pretend fiancé wouldn't be so different to what you were already doing. You were already living with him and helping him take care of children you were both emotionally invested in. All you had to do now was marry your roommate who you had a huge crush on, and then guarantee Eri's stay with Aizawa. Whatever happened to you afterward would be completely up to Aizawa. Emotions be damned. Your selfless nature threatened to hurt you as your fingers closed over the ring. Alright, I'll play my part in this logical ruse. For Eri's future. For her happiness. And for the chance to experience life as Aizawa's partner. Fake it may be, but this was most likely the closest you'd get. Aizawa let go of the ring and let out a shaky breath. Thank you. And I'm sorry. You shook your head as you shakily slid the ring on your finger. What surprised you was the fact that it fit perfectly. Don't be sorry. I'm happy to do what we've got to do to keep Eri safe and happy. I told you, I'm her mother figure. I intend to play the part genuinely and at my fullest capacity. Even after the ruse was to end. Oh, and Shoyuta? Yes. Your plan's not logical at all. Just saying. Aizawa groaned, and his grumpiness brought equilibrium back to your world. If only for a few minutes before the gravity of the situation you were going to be facing moving forward pulled you back to a startling halt once again. We're going to Mrs. Aizawa in around 2 months. Holy shit! Hizashi screeched so loud that Shoyuta visibly winced before shooting him a pointed glare. This show of hostility did not deter his friend as he continued to freak out emphatically at his teacher's station, which was conveniently located right beside his own. You gave her a ring? You told her it was a logical ruse? Are you a effing moron, Shoyuta? The erasure hero frowned and then offered a serious shrug. Shut up, she's right there. And honestly, I don't know anymore. I turn into a fool when I'm around her. Yeah. Hizashi rolled his eyes at Shuta's oblivious nature when it came to interpersonal relationships. That might be because you've got the hots for her, but you lack the capacity to understand normal human emotions and their effects on everyday cognition. Shoyuta frowned at the voice hero, feeling put out at his blunt criticism. Of course he knew that he didn't really care about what anyone thought of him. It wasn't his life's mission to be the most well-liked person in his social circle, but there was something about knowing that he could potentially be a complete D-head to you without even realizing it that grated at him wrong. She said she'd do it. He defended himself, voice gruff but muted. After all, you were on the other side of the staff room discussing what seemed to be Monoma's sociopathic tendencies and the need for some monthly quirk counseling with Vlad King, just in case. Shoyuta shook his head and tilted his head slightly so that he could look at Hizashi as he spoke. She wants Eri to be happy. Hizashi nodded, a pensive look on his usually excitable features. You know, you're a really good guy, man. He sighed and leaned back, his hands stretching to scratch the back of his neck sheepishly. Just tell her how you feel. I mean, she's already living with ya. Shoyuta shook his head, clasping his hands together as he snuck a glance your way. His almost choked on his spit as he locked gazes with you from across the staff room. What were the chances that you would be looking right back at him in that moment? It was like fate was conspiring to turn him into the world's biggest fool. He internally scoffed. Look at him, thinking about illogical concepts like fate. Oh shit, Eraserhead looks smart, she's comin' right on over here. Hizashi, to his credit, looked incredibly natural as he bopped along to music that was most likely not even playing from his ever-present headphones. Shoyuta gulped and steeled himself, his apathetic mask firmly fixed while his heart pounded louder and louder in his chest with every step you took. Watching you close the distance, he took in your hesitance as you clasped your hands before you, knuckles white and gaze skittish as you looked anywhere except right at him. Aizawa, I've emailed you some, reports regarding the, progress class 1A is demonstrating pertaining to their mental state and fitness for practical application of heroics on the field. He watched you as you spoke and couldn't help but notice the slight bags under your eyes. He frowned and sat up a little straighter. He didn't fail to notice the way you stiffened further at his sudden movement. Honestly, he was definite now that you were truly scared of him. That very thought left an extremely sour taste in his mouth. Did you, get to have a look at them? He shook his head silently, eyes still on yours as he watched you react. Your eyes widened, and then you blinked rapidly before smiling stiffly. Oh, of course. There's no rush or anything, just, take a look when you can, or something, I don't know. Thanks, Y/N. Shoyuta hoped he sounded as thankful as he felt. He was worried about his students, and having a specialist counselor living in with his students was an incredibly resource for their recovery. Adversary after adversary, it was pretty much a miracle that all of his students were still on track to becoming incredibly pro-heroes. Not that he would ever admit that out loud to their smug little faces. His toes curled as he tried his best not to say anything to set you on edge, or even more on edge than you already were. You look tired. A smug sense of satisfaction came over him at the snort of amusement that left you at his observation. You're one to talk, Shoyuta. The cheeky smile you shot him pierced his heart with a happy giddiness that filled him from the inside out. It was weird. As you turned to make your way towards your office space once again, Hizashi nudged Shoyuta with a muted chortle. Oh my god, look at your face. What a dopey serial killer grin. Shuta's face immediately fell. Shut the hell up and mind your own business, Hizashi. Hey, don't be like that. Also, I have an idea if you really want to show her how much she means to ya. Seymour, I'll write it down for ya. Curious and a little desperate, Shoyuta looked over at his friend's notepad as he scrawled down instructions in his surprisingly neat script. The Erasure Hero's eyebrows rose higher and higher with each line he read, and by the end of Hizashi's mad scrawl, Shoyuta was ready to ball the piece of paper up and hurl it into the nearest wastebasket. No, he deadpanned. That would mean my students would know what I did, and that would, quite frankly, be the worst. Hizashi grinned. Not all of them have to know. Just the band. Shoyuta rolled his eyes and snatched the piece of paper off his friend's desk. He got up abruptly and grabbed for his teaching packet, filled with announcements and information about the students' work studies. Just before he whisked himself off towards class, Shoyuta paused and turned to his friend briefly, a look of uncertainty on his usually haggard face. Do women really like this kind of thing? Hisashi glanced up at Shoyuta and grinned encouragingly. Women love it. Trust me. The day of the culture festival was finally upon you, and Eri's ruby eyes were bright with anticipation as you brushed her hair before she was on her way with Mirio Togata. A pang of anguish clenched at your heart as you thought about the promising young hero who had worked so hard throughout his time at you, only to have his powers erased, saving the little girl who grew to mean so much to everyone who she'd met so far. Togata was one of the students who was actively involved in looking after Eri throughout the day around campus, alongside the U.A teachers and Midoriya. Eri always seemed to enjoy her time with both Togata and Midoriya, and got along well with the teachers she was left with at times when both you and Aizawa couldn't watch her due to other work commitments. Eri was particularly enraptured with the rescue hero, 13. 13 had been the one to graciously pull Eri aside during one of her many breakdowns about her villainous quirk, telling her with so much kindness and patience that her quirk had the potential to save lives, just like 13's. Just because her quirk was used by others to do bad things didn't mean that Eri was a bad person. You were so grateful to 13, and you knew Aizawa was too. Eri seemed to carry herself in a lighter air after having had that talk. Clearly, it was something that she needed to hear from someone who could relate to her extremely valid worries. Miss L/N? Eri called softly, bringing you out of your deep thoughts. You blinked and leaned forward, smiling at her through the mirror's reflection as you finished brushing her hair. Are you going to the festival as well? You nodded. Wouldn't miss it for the world. You were also discreet crowd control, an extra layer of security to diffuse any tensions that could potentially burst out into confrontations during the festival. Members of the public hardly knew who you were and what your quirk was, so Nizu clearly wanted to utilize your abilities to the fullest during the public event. Aizawa had wanted to be part of the security details himself, but was elected to remain by Ares' side throughout the festival in case the exposure to so many different people all at once set off her quirk through mechanism of stress. You remembered how Aizawa folded his arms and frowned so deeply he was almost pouting when he'd learned that he had to actually be among the frivolity for the first time since being a student. He'd been in a foul mood until Eri had shyly approached him and cuddled into his side on the couch, telling him that she was excited about seeing the festival with him. His deep-set scowl had immediately softened into a puzzled frown at the clear enthusiasm pouring through in Eri's otherwise understated quiet voice. Shoyuta Aizawa was truly smitten with his soon-to-be daughter. You found yourself wearing a dumb soft smile on your lips at the thought of Aizawa as Eri's legal parent. It would be the best possible outcome for both the little girl who had suffered so much and the lonely man who clearly had so much love and care to give. Not to mention that fact that Eri Aizawa would end up being your legal daughter as well. Heat rose to your cheeks as you patted down Eri's dress before helping her wear her little satchel across her chest. The little girl had no idea what Aizawa had told the social workers, and she also had no idea that both you and Aizawa were legally petitioning for full parental responsibility over her in the next couple of months. All Eri knew was that Aizawa was strangely busy every time you were around her, and that you were suddenly feeling very sleepy and going straight to bed whenever Aizawa let her cuddle up beside him to watch evening cartoons until her bedtime. In all honesty, life as Aizawa's roommate since he gave you that diamond ring and shamelessly asking you to pretend to be his wife was a little awkward. You were fighting your true feelings for him, attempting to keep them at bay so that you didn't accidentally creep Aizawa out with the true enthusiasm you felt about potentially being able to feel his lips against yours at the eventual wedding. Gods, there was going to be a wedding, at least you thought there would be? Maybe Aizawa was just going to take you to the BRDS, Deaths and Marriages Registry and simply sign a marriage contract with you? You couldn't help but frown as sudden disappointment filled you like a chilled breeze. It seemed like the most logical approach to the whole fake marriage thing anyways. What use would there be in spending all that money on an actual wedding if you two were going to just get a divorce once the children's court proceedings were complete? The disappointment of that realization settled into the pit of your stomach, and suddenly you didn't feel like leaving the dorm at all. Well, that sure escalated quickly. You couldn't help but think to yourself as you began to wallow in the depths of your self-imposed lonesome misery. Of course that was what he was going to do. You shouldn't have even allowed yourself to think or even imagine otherwise. Miss L/N? Aries' voice brought you back to reality, and you forced a smile on your face, hoping to the gods above that it looked genuine enough for Aerie to accept. Grateful to her when she nodded back with a twinkle in her eyes, you let her tug you towards the door. I think Mirio is waiting in front of the building. He's going to take us to the festival. Awesome. Lead the way, pretty bean. You winked at Aerie and allowed her to grab a firm hold of your hand, tugging you forward with her small strides. You slowed your own pace so you could remain half a pace behind her, a fond smile fixed on your lips as you noted just how excited the little girl was about the whole affair. Izuku's going to perform with his class during the festival. Aerie squeezed your hand slightly as the two of you made your way through the first-floor student common room. Weaving between the furniture, you noted that all of Class 1A were already out of the dorm. That was definitely a good sign. Everyone was most likely making final preparations for their festival performance. I can't wait to see it. I'm a little scared though. You frowned slightly at the clear trepidation in Aerie's voice. You gently squeezed her hand in your own, tone warm as you spoke quietly so as to not startle her. Mirio and I will be right there with you. It's okay, you're safe and we're all going to have the best time. I just know it. Aerie looked up at you, hope glistening in her eyes. She blinked. Mr. Aizawa too? A warm smile spread its way over your expression and you nodded. Mr. Aizawa especially. You know why? Aerie shook her head, eyes wide in clear curiosity. Honestly, she was too precious. You grinned and winked at her. Because he gets to see the festival with you for the first time ever. This is ridiculous and I cannot believe I'm letting you guys do this. Shoyuta frowned at his grinning students. The musical instruments they all held in their grasps looked like weapons of war, and he didn't like the knowing glint in Bakuga's eyes as he beat at his drums during their final practice. Hizashi waved the erasure hero off with a dismissive gesture. Come on, eraser, don't be such a wet blanket. If you're gonna propose, do it in style. Yeah, I agree with present Mike. Kaminari offered the voice hero a thumbs up, only to tuck it back into his fist as he withered under Shuta's immediate glare. Don't encourage him. Don't forget who assigned your extra credit work. Sorry, sir. Shoyuta sighed and shook his head, shutting his eyes as the back of his head and neck tensed up from the impending stress that their performance was going to bring him. Why had he let Hizashi talk him into this again? All right, little rock stars. Who are you calling little? Are you looking down on me? Bakugo somehow managed to scream and growl at the same time, and Shoyuta was loath to outwardly express the fact that he was very much impressed. He didn't know anyone had the capability of doing that. His students never failed to surprise him. Jairu rolled her eyes. No one's trying to deflate that impossible ego of yours, Bakugo. Chill out. Fine. To Shuta's surprise, Bakugo didn't argue the point any further. Rationally, he didn't have any reason to argue in the first place, but the simple fact that Kyukajiru was the reason everyone was saved from Bakugo's angry tirade this time was alarming in a good way. Looked like someone had a little crush. Not that he could be one to talk, harboring feelings for you for months, only to blurt out he wanted to be part of a fake marriage with you for practical reasons. If only he could use his quirk against himself to erase himself from existence, then he wouldn't have to deal with the mortification that came with knowing how much of a fool he has been around you. Alright. Anyways, you guys know the plan? Any questions? Hizashi asked as he warily eyed Bakugo. Tokoyami shook his head. It's simple enough. Not sure why we're doing this all of a sudden though. The avian-headed boy turned toward Shoyuta and raised his eyebrows at him. Is this a prank? Shuta's jaw almost dropped at Tokoyami's candid question. He couldn't blame his students for thinking he wasn't being serious about this whole proposal thing. Honestly, it wasn't his style to announce something so personal so publicly. Not to mention the fact that getting married for a loner like himself didn't appear to be much to his style either. No, Shoyuta sighed, this is real. Yayorozu frowned. Mr. Aizawa, how long did you? I never thought? It's all kind of sudden, don't you think? Shoyuta could feel Hizashi's glare on the side of his face. Flux could kill. It is what it is. He waved his hand dismissively before turning away from them and heading back out into the festival. I'm trusting you to do well. This is important to me. Now that he could feel everyone's puzzled stares on his back, he wanted nothing more than to hide away from the world in his sleeping bag and just go out to his nightly patrol. Everything was getting complicated because of his sudden irrationality. This is why feelings are the worst. Suddenly, his phone rang, and he checked his messages only to sigh in exasperated relief. It seemed Midoriya ran into some trouble on the way to school. Why he wasn't already on campus was yet to be found out. Aizawa was glad for the distraction. Hero work was what he was good at, and if there was a security alert for the outer grounds of the campus, then he would gladly volunteer to be back up if only to bring back some semblance of normal into his life. Yu and Eri ended up meeting up with Aizawa just before Class 1, as performance was to start. Eri had started to get antsy and was constantly asking Yu when Aizawa was going to make an appearance. Her cotton candy stick was drooping dangerously as the sugar began to lose its fluffiness, clumping together and losing its soft form. The poor girl refused to see anything until Aizawa arrived, and as time drew on by, your patience with the man began to wane. Sure, you were attracted him, but he was letting a little girl down, and though you didn't know the reason why, he could have sent a message or something to let you know what was going on so that you could tell the disappointed girl. Yamada shuffled you, Eri, Aizawa and Mirio into the auditorium towards the front of the stage. He eyed you worriedly, and when he caught your eye, he smiled warily. "You okay, pretty lady?" You sighed, shoulders slumping as you shrugged. You refused to speak with Aizawa when he finally met up with you, and both Mirio and Eri could feel the tension between the two of you until you made up a half-baked excuse about feeling tired to placate the kids' worry for your sudden quietness. Of course, under your short glares, Aizawa had to have known that you weren't exactly impressed with how flaky he was. Trouble in paradise? You could say that. Not to mention that he was dragging you into a marriage that was going to be broken apart when he got the legal outcome he wanted for Eri's guardianship. You truly wanted what was best for Eri, and you were glad that you could help in providing her a stable and loving home, but you couldn't help but think of the personal cost that you would have to pay. It was only human, after all, and there was a limit to selflessness. "I'm fine," you sighed, waving Yamada off. "I'm excited about the kid's performance." Yamada made a face at you, disbelief written all over his face. "Yeah, I can see the excitement pouring out of your soul from this angle." "Shut up, Yamada." You deadpanned under your breath. He blinked at you and simply rested a gentle hand on your shoulder before squeezing. "Sorry, Y/N. I really hope this performance lifts your mood." His eyes flickered towards Aizawa, and you glanced at the man holding Eri's hand. He looked bored at first glance, but the longer you looked at him, you realized there was something off about him. His tired, red-rimmed eyes were fixated on the stage, and he seemed to hold himself as stiff as a board as opposed to his usual relaxed slouch. He didn't seem excited about the performance. You huffed out of your nose, still annoyed at him, and turned back to the stage. He could be a total wet blanket if he wanted to be. You were going to watch your kids do their best, and you were going to cheer them on as hard as you could. They put in a lot of effort into the culture festival performance, and you wanted them to know that you were there watching and appreciating all their efforts. Someone had to, after all, and it didn't seem like Aizawa was about to. Why did you find him attractive again? Y/N, will you marry me? Shoyuda eyed the obnoxious banner that unfurled itself after his students finished their flashy, yet somehow endearingly clumsy, dance routine. The band began to play a soft rendition of Runaway by the Corrs, and there the special effects crew of Class 1A had the gall to point a spotlight over you and himself as the whole spectacle started. Oh, now he really wished that his quirk was teleportation because he was so embarrassed in that moment that he wanted to get the haul out from the situation Hisashi had assured him wouldn't be as bad as it felt. Bakugo was smirking from his place at the drums, and Midoriya's eyes were filled to the brim with tears. The rest of his students were looking at him from the stage with wide, expectant eyes, like they wanted this as much as he did, except they actually had the emotional aptitude to express what they wanted even if it was through their expressions. The only thing that kept him rooted to the spot was Eri's hand clutching onto his capture weapon. Oh, and somehow Nemuri, Toshinori and Hisashi were all standing at the exit of the auditorium with stern looks on their faces. Shoyuda internally blanched. Since when was All Might in on this whole ordeal? Hisashi probably ran his mouth, again, about his personal business. Idiot. The whole auditorium was silent. And then, Diamen, that idiot child, Minoma spoke up loudly. Did she say no? I can't see. Shoyuta heard the telltale thud of Kendo chopping him on the back of his head and took solace in imagining the boy crumpling to the ground from the impact. Good, he deserved it. Shut up, Minoma. Way to ruin the moment. She hissed loudly. She was his new favorite. Confirmed. He heard you stutter beside him. Gathering his courage, he turned to you to see your reaction, and he wasn't quite sure what to make of your stiffness. Was that anger? Or maybe it was embarrassment. Y/N. Shoyuta couldn't help but mumble your name. I suppose I thought this would be a good idea after speaking with Hisashi, but I don't think you're appreciating this proposal as much as he said you would. Your eyes met his, and suddenly he felt like you were the one with an erasure quirk. With one look, devastated and hurt, you wiped out all the good feelings that lingered in his body. Gods, he shouldn't have listened to Hisashi. Is this a joke to you, Eraserhead? Shoyuta winced. You were using his hero name. You were livid. He shook his head, trying to keep the panic out of his tone. The one time he wanted to express himself, and he completely F'd it up. He couldn't imagine how shit his students could feel once they learned they took a very active part in messing up his negative existing love life. Quite the opposite. I wouldn't allow such a public proposal if I didn't want everyone knowing exactly what we're going to be. He cut himself off as your tears finally began to trail down your cheeks. He heard Eri whimper. It was a shame. She just smiled and laughed for the first time only a few minutes ago. He felt bad for her. This whole thing was all his fault. Why make a big deal of it when all you're gonna do is end it all as soon as you get what you want? Shuta's eyes widened. What? Is that what you really thought? He turned to you and shook his head, ignoring the murmuring students, staff and visitors around him as he looked into your eyes. Time to be brave and tell you exactly what he meant by his proposal. I said that because I was afraid. Afraid that he was forcing you into something you didn't want to do. Even now, he was afraid that you didn't want anything to do with him, but your reaction, that had to mean something. The tears had to mean something, and the way you winced at the idea of it all ending even before anything began. It had to mean something. Shoyuta took a deep breath and stared into your eyes, blinking a few times because the stress he felt had his dry eye acting up. I wouldn't ever ask you to marry me if I intended for it to end. That would be the height of illogical, given that I've got feelings for you. Shoyuta paused and suddenly felt his throat tighten as he finally asked you the question himself. Properly. So, will you marry me? He didn't think any feeling in the world could top the relief he felt when you gave him a timid nod before letting out an embarrassed laugh. Fine. You're really bad at emotions, Shoyuta. He couldn't help but snort in equally embarrassed laughter as he looked away sheepishly. Gods, it was true. Being around you turned him into a complete and utter fool. Yeah. It's really not my thing. Sorry. A few days had passed the proposal, and you stumbled back into everyday life as best as you could. The only difference now was that Aizawa had literally confessed in front of everyone during the culture festival that he had romantic feelings for you, and now you had to live with that knowledge as his roommate. Things were, quite admittedly, a little bit awkward. For you. Not for him, it seemed. Aizawa was living his life as if the whole proposal didn't happen. Honestly, the only thing that had changed between the two of you was the fact that he greeted you with a stunted, lethargic wave of his hand rather than the barely there nod that he used to if he was feeling generous. Hey, Miss Sunshine, could we get on with it? I've got places to be in half an hour. You blinked at Bakugo, lips turning down into a stern frown. On a school night? It's already 8:30. Curfew's at 9:30. You raised your eyebrows at the firecracker sitting before you. Wait, you're not planning another one of your scuffles in the training fields again, are you? Bakugo groaned and slid down further on the sofa, eyes flicking to Aizawa, who was sitting at the kitchen counter with Eri with her coloring. The erasure hero paused his idle shading on the all-mic drawing that his little charge had kindly offered to him that evening to shoot his hot-headed student a warning glare. You'll get more than house arrest and chores if you pull that stunt again, kid. Even you winced at the threat laced in his tone, turning pleading eyes to your troubled student. He let out a huff at your expression and rolled his eyes. Yeah, I'm not a dumbass. I'm not gonna get kicked out for something stupid like that. I was just talking about going to sleep. Overcome with silence once again, you blinked blankly before wording your next question as carefully as you could. Do you often sleep so early? Bakugu, much to his credit, simply crossed his arms and glared at you with a curt nod. I'm usually in bed now, right after homework, but I've gotta fix my DMN issues here with you on Thursdays until I'm fucking awesome again. Language, Bakugu. Aizawa called tiredly from beside Eri. The teen had the sense to wince as he realized that he was potentially corrupting a young mind with his filthy language. Not very heroic of him. Sheet, sorry. Bakugu! Aizawa barked again, and you had to stifle the giggle that threatened to bubble its way out of your mouth. It was hard to keep your cool when you got to watch Aizawa get all protective with your daughter. You're getting all red again. It's because of Mr. Aizawa, isn't it? Heh. Bakugu ignored Aizawa's reprimand and turned on you with a knowing glint in his eyes. Look, I don't care about all your romance, sure, I mean stuff. He glanced at Eri's back, which was currently hunched over her coloring, blissfully uncaring of the conversation happening behind her. But I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to explain to her exactly where babies come from at the rate you two are going, heh? Bakugu! Both you and Aizawa sounded absolutely scandalized, and Bakugu looked much too pleased with himself. You made a mental note to yourself to hold the sessions somewhere your perceptive student wouldn't notice you going all gooey for your soon-to-be husband. Ashido's gaze lingered on your back as you stood in the kitchen preparing lunch on Saturday. She ushered Uraraka and Hagakure towards her with a silent hand gesture and wrapped her arms around her friend's shoulders. Something's weird about those two, Ashido whispered. When did they even start dating? Hagakure let out a quiet giggle. Well, they do live together. Mr. Aizawa doesn't seem the dating type, so maybe they just do cute movie nights or something in their dorm. That doesn't make sense. Uraraka frowned and shook her head as she pondered the nature of their dorm supervisor's relationship. Mr. Aizawa's got night patrols. Not since Eri moved in. Ashido grinned, bouncing slightly on the ball of her feet with the enthusiasm of knowing more than the others did. Hagakure's probably right. They're having secret dates. Uraraka giggled and nodded along with Ashido, the pink student's enthusiasm spreading around the small gossip circle. You reckon they've kissed and stuff? All three girls let out a gasp, their eyes glued to your back as you worked on lunch, completely unaware of their scheming. The thought of Mr. Aizawa kissing anyone was enough to render the girls speechless for a few seconds. Ashido broke the silence with a slight grimace. Reckon he kisses her with all that scruff? If he does, I wonder if Miss L/N likes it? Hagakure squeaked loudly, and both Uraraka and Ashido threw their hands over her mouth or where they thought her mouth was to quieten her urgently. Shoo! Not so loud. Ashido! You're having way too much fun. Don't you have studying to do? It was Ashido's turn to squeak as Mr. Aizawa materialized behind the three girls seemingly out of nowhere. The girls turned their timid gazes up to their teacher and allowed themselves a good look at him up close as he stood slouched before them with his hands deep in his pockets and his face impassive as always. All three couldn't fathom how you were attracted to their homeroom teacher. It's Saturday though? Ashido appealed. Uraraka and Hagakure hummed in agreement, supporting their friend's argument. And it's almost time for lunch. Hagakure piped up. Aizawa turned his gaze to the invisible girl and sighed. Fine, but at least go help Y/N with lunch if you've got time to gossip about our relationship. The three girls set off with deep blushes of shame on their cheeks to help you out, unequivocally caught out by their teacher for discussing the ins and outs of his love life. Ashido pouted as she helped you set the table, passing by Uraraka and Hagakure in the kitchen as she uttered under her breath. I'm telling you, something's weird about these two. They don't act like a normal couple. Uraraka shrugged as she passed Ashido the large bowl of garden salad she was holding. Well, Mr. Aizawa's not a normal guy when you really think about it. And love works in weird ways. I'm just happy that they're happy. Ashido's shoulders relaxed as she glanced at you and noticed you're humming cheerily to yourself as you completed the lunch preparations. She smiled and mirrored Uraraka's shrug. Yeah, guess you're right. Hagakure, you want to test your stealth skills out tonight? Hagakure squeaked again and cheered in affirmation. Yes, yes. Tell me what you want to know. I'll get that good gossip for ya, promise. I hate you. Stop calling me. Shoyuta moved to hang up the phone, only to wince at the static-ridden feedback that came through the speaker alongside Hizashi's loud whining. Come on, man, you know I only did that to help you. It's been like a week now since that went down. It's old news now. Everyone's talking about All Might and the huge but coffee stain he's got on the crotch of his suit breeds now. Chill out, man. Shoyuta sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose lightly, trying to will away the impending headache that usually came out of conversations with his best friend. Why was Hizashi his best friend again? He really couldn't think of a good reason in that moment. The hell do you want, Zashi? Details. The erasure hero frowned. What details? Hizashi let out a weird laugh on the other end of the line, and Shoyuta just knew that the man was about to ask something stupid. Did you kiss her? He rolled his eyes before Hizashi even finished asking the question. None of your business. So you didn't? Shame. He could hear the frown in the voice hero's words. You're engaged to her, you're living with her, and you're obviously in love with her, so you gotta kiss her sometime soon. I didn't know kissing someone was time sensitive. I would have planned the progression of our relationship better if I had known. Shoyuta deadpanned, slouching further down on his office chair. He sat tucked away in his dark room with the door closed, not hiding, but simply biding his time. Okay, so he was hiding. Was it really that shameful to admit he was hiding from the fiancé he hadn't even kissed yet? He wanted to, gods, the thought of your lips pressed gently against his tortured him even on his best days. But he didn't know how to go about it. He couldn't just grab you and smash his lips against yours. That would most likely startle you beyond repair. He was already antisocial as it was. Adding SXL harassment to his list of not-so-social traits wasn't something he thought would be very conducive to the situation. His students were also starting to question the nature of his relationship with you, and for some reason that rubbed him the wrong way. He didn't want anyone to even have the opportunity to question how genuine his feelings were towards you. He'd never felt so lost around a person like he did around you, and usually feeling lost felt terrible, but with you it made him grin when he hoped no one was looking. He felt weightless, and enjoyed the thoughtlessness that came with the bliss of your smiling image. He knew he loved you. His mind was fighting the whole notion day in, day out. How could he be in love with you after only knowing you for a few months? Still, he couldn't deny the way his heart pumped like crazy whenever you were near. That, and the fact that you saying yes to his stupid public proposal was officially in the books as the happiest day of his life. But of course, he didn't show it. So no one knew. Shoyuta, where are you right now? In my room, Shoyuta droned. And where's Y/N? In her room, probably. Hizashi groaned, and Shoyuta just knew that he was rolling his eyes in exasperation. Isn't Eri having a sleepover with your class out in the student common room? Shuta's heart rate picked up as he immediately realized where Hizashi was going with his questions. Yeah. Which is exactly why I can't go out there. Why not? No one's around to interrupt. It's a Saturday evening, and there's so much SXL tension between the two of you. Come on. At least go out there and ask if she wants to sit with you on the couch and watch a movie. Shoyuta bit the inside of his cheek. He'd never felt so nervous in his life about anything. Even facing villains was more favorable than what Hizashi was asking him to do. He didn't want to be too forward. He didn't want to scare you away. You seemed timid behind your friendliness, and he knew very well that one wrong move could mess up his relationship with you for the rest of his life. He wanted you to be happy with him. Ask her about the movie. Shoyuta relented, eyes narrowing as he spoke sternly into the phone. Nothing else. That's cool, man. Hizashi spoke gently from his end. The kiss will most likely happen tonight though. Don't force it or anything, but I reckon it's gonna happen. He added cheekily. Before Shoyuta could say anything, Hizashi said his quick goodbyes, good lucks, and then hung up. The erasure hero was left staring at his phone with an incredulous look on his face. He didn't know what to think of Hisashi's closing comments, but before he left his room, just for good measure, he made sure to brush his teeth and kept a packet of mints in his trouser pocket just in case. Never in your life had you thought you would end up sharing a bowl of popcorn with Shoyuta Aizawa, but here you were. The movie that was playing on the screen was some romantic comedy that you'd already forgotten the name of, and Aizawa seemed to be having a much better time dozing off with his hand half dug into the bowl of popcorn rather than finding reason to laugh at the antics on the screen. And you, well, you could hardly focus on the movie when you were pressed against Aizawa's side with his arm over the back of the couch just behind your shoulders. The man had waited for you to take a seat before staring you dead in the eyes before shooing you over slightly, only to squeeze between you and the arm rest. You remained stiff beside him as he slouched into his usual position, having plucked the bowl of popcorn from your lap and transferring it deftly into his own. All of this had been wordless, and all the communication the two of you had done was all through bashful eye contact and stilted hand gestures. He was warm beside you, and part of you wanted to try and lean on him a little more just to see if you'd get a reaction out of him. Just as you were about to act on that whim, you caught sight of the actor and actress on the screen locking lips in what seemed to be an impassioned frenzy. Your body moved before your mind could tell you how stupidly forward you were being. You wanted nothing more than to receive some affection from Aizawa now that the two of you were officially getting married, but you didn't want to be a hoe and ask for it shamelessly. Still, it seemed the fates were not on your side, and just as the steamy makeout session on screen was getting even hotter, you had finished leaning your body weight against Aizawa's side. Your cheeks were so hot they were surely close to combusting, and you willed yourself to keep your eyes locked to the screen even though the couple making out there was only serving to get you hot in places other than your cheeks. "They're really going for it," Aizawa mumbled beside you, but his voice sounded deeper as you heard it straight from his chest. You gulped and nodded. "Why, looks like he's eating her face." "Well, she looks just as ravenous, and the amount of tongue she's using is not necessary at all." Aizawa's colloquial tone had you smiling despite your growing embarrassment. And just because they're stuck in an elevator now doesn't mean they're not in a public place. Those two should keep their clothes on. Agreed. You nodded, reaching for popcorn to try and come off as chill and normal. And didn't they? Just come back from having dinner. Did anyone even pop a mint? You popped a piece of popcorn in your mouth as you said this, chewing as you mulled over the scene playing on the screen. It's like they're trying to taste each other's dinners all over again. You, disgusting. You felt Aizawa shudder under you, and you couldn't help but giggle. I'd at least be a little more considerate. And then you darn goofed. You kiss and stuff? You floundered to continue the conversation, and assessed that you were doing a very bad job of it. You made it sound like Aizawa either wasn't desirable enough to have kissed anyone before, or that you were just too much of an idiot to function in the realms of reality. You seem to know a lot about it. You justified your questions lamely. He was quiet beside you for a bit, and you could just imagine telling Eri and the students tomorrow morning, bright and early on a Sunday, that their homeroom teacher decided you were too dumb to marry. But then he surprised you with what sounded like a choked laugh. "Not often, but I've kissed a few people. Not a big deal." And now you felt like a moron because you had never kissed anyone in your life, which was quite sad given you were well into your adult years. You hadn't had the time to date, always focused on your studies and work. Success over romance had always been your motto, and that may have been why you didn't know what your type of man was until you'd met and lived with Shoyuta Aizawa. You had been denying it for a while, but in all honesty, you had known he was the one since you'd set eyes on him properly for the first time during that staff meeting. "Yeah, not a big deal," you trailed off quietly, reaching for more popcorn to shove into your mouth before you said something idiotic again. However, your hand did that stupid cliché thing where it brushed against his fingers, and the contact had you freeze up immediately. You felt him stiffen slightly beside you, and you immediately tried to pull yourself away from him just to spare him the awkwardness of being around you for too long when you felt him hold you against him with the arm that had previously been resting on the back of the couch. "Where are you going? Movie's not over." His voice sounded steady, but his grip was a little too firm around you. Was he nervous as well? You blinked and nodded, settling back down, pulling your hand from the bowl. You placed it onto your lap and kept your eyes on the screen. The movie had moved on, the scene changing to a bedroom one. The actors were half naked, and the man was pushing the woman onto the bed. You couldn't look anymore, and you buried your face into the safest place you could find, Aizawa's chest. His scent of inked paper and strangely fruity-scented coffee was so much stronger than you had ever experienced it before, but you didn't think you could ever feel overwhelmed by it. He felt comfortable, and you were grateful. Sure, you were embarrassed, but you still felt light. Being around Shoyuta Aizawa was in no way stressful. It was just new. What's the rating on this stupid movie? Aizawa, for the first time you could ever recall in your presence, sounded incredibly flustered. You heard him curse under his breath as the sound cut out from the movie. You peeked over and found yourself relieved at the fact that the screen was completely blank. You pulled back from Aizawa slightly, but remained glued beside him because of his secured arm. I should have checked that one. Hizashi said it was funny, so I just... Yamada. I should have known. I'll kill him. You mumbled, cheeks receding in heat now that the movie was safely off. Thanks for turning it off. Usually I'm not so jumpy about that kind of content, but it's different watching it with someone you want to do that stuff with. Your eyes widened, and this time he let you pull away from him so that you could survey him in full with all of your incredulity. Come again. You tried to clarify. He wouldn't look you in the eyes as he offered his clarification. If you weren't feeling so dim and embarrassed, you would have cooed at how cute Aizawa was being. So he had a boyish, clumsy side after all. I want to try that stuff with you. Not now, but when you're ready. And we've got all the time in the world, so don't feel stressed about it, but Hizashi said we should kiss at least and I... You frowned. If Hizashi told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? Aizawa mirrored your frown, looking affronted. Not at all. Then why rush into a kiss if you don't want to? But I do. You paused. You didn't know what to say to that. Your eyes flickered to Aizawa's lips, and you didn't notice that your tongue had darted out to moisten your own in anticipation. You wanted to kiss him too. You scooted a little closer to him, unable to look him in the eyes as you used your lifetime supply of bold seductress in that moment. I don't mind if we kissed now. You shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant over the whole thing when inside you were freaking out all the way to the moon and back. You had just told Aizawa that you were okay with kissing him. You were the one to have suggested a kiss take place. And you said you didn't want to be shamelessly forward. Whoop-de-doo, woman, look at you now. He turned his body to face you, and his hands felt warm as they cupped your cheeks. The bowl of popcorn fell onto the floor with his movements, but neither of you could seem to care less about the resultant mess. It was just popcorn, you could clean it up later. Leaning in, he looked into your eyes searchingly, and you couldn't help but marvel at how soft he looked as he approached. Gone was the strict, scruffy teacher you had come to know. Gone was the stern yet caring father figure you'd come to admire and learn from. Gone was the Shoyuta Aizawa you'd imagined would never dream of thinking you anything more than a colleague. As his lips touched yours, softer than your mind could ever conjure in your late-night imaginings, you met a new Shoyuta Aizawa. You met the man who was going to love you in the dark of the night, holding you close and tender, with his arm wrapped around you, and his voice soothing the worries of your soul. There, as he kissed you slow and sweeter than you could have ever thought, you finally got to meet the man you had agreed to marry. It took everything in Hagikure's willpower to not squeal in delight and give herself away. She snapped a quiet picture of Mr. Aizawa and Miss L/N kissing sweetly on their common room sofa, and slipped out the door before they could realize anyone was in their common room in the first place. As soon as she clicked the door shut, she rushed off to the student dorms to rendezvous with Ishido and Uraraka to spill the piping hot tea. Works inspired by this one. Luck of the Draw by Solaris and Fs.